Chapter 170. When those words fell in her ears, Chu Qingyin turned in surprise to look at the person lying on her shoulder. Muhu, I knows that 10 years ago, you already wanted to give up on I. The soft words were filled with a sigh, despair, and loneliness. She seemed to hear the sadness that came from the depths of his heart. Chu Qingyin gritted her teeth and held back the tears that were about to spill out of her eyes. She raised her head to not let them fall. 10 years ago, was it that fire? She opened her mouth, wanted to take this chance to ask what had happened in the past. But those slightly closed eyes that covered all the light had a serenity that people couldn't bear to disturb. His thin lips were moist. If Big Ice Cube was a woman, people who saw this scene would want to kiss him, but she immediately stopped that thought. What had happened in the past 10 years? These 3 words had already become a knot in Big Ice Cube's heart, and also became her curse. Chu Qingyin secretly made a decision in her heart. She had to find the truth of what had happened in the past. She put one hand on Big Ice Cube's shoulder and the other hand around his waist. She brought him step by step to the main yard. No matter how difficult it is, don't be afraid. I will accompany you. When you are tired, I will lend you my shoulder. When you are cold, I will open my arms for you. Perhaps my shoulder is not broad enough. Perhaps my arms are not warm enough. But as long as you need me, I will be there. Although I am not strong, have no power, and don't have great wealth, but what I have, I am willing to give it to you. You are the first person other than father and mother that has been good to me. I, Chu Qingyin, will always remember this. Although the road was not far, Chu Qingyin spent an entire hour to bring the person beside her to the main yard. Hong Yi and Cheng Yi, who were waiting at the entrance, saw them and were shocked. Then they immediately came forward, one on the left and one on the right, planning to support their lord. Young Princess Consort, you've worked hard. Let's do it. Hong Yi said with a smile. Chu Qingyin felt that this was a good idea. Just as she was about to nod, she felt the person leaning on her tightly hugging her. Her gentle brows suddenly furrowed, as if she was very resistant to human contact. Chu Qingyin saw this and sighed softly. Big Ice Cube didn't like to be touched by others, even when he was drunk. However, this was also good. A self-disciplined man was more reassuring. Chu Qingyin raised her hand to stop Hong Yi and Cheng Yi from approaching. She squeezed out a smile and said, "No need. I've already helped him here. It's not a big deal." Hong Yi and Cheng Yi heard this and had to retreat. Hong Yi's face was still worried, but Cheng Yi's face was already sour. The moment she finished speaking, Chu Qingyin felt the hand that was strangling her to the point of suffocation finally relax. Chu Qingyin rejoiced that she had finally understood his intentions. However, she had also suffered a lot in the future. Using all her strength, she finally placed the Big Ice Cube on the bed. Chu Qingyin slumped to the side, almost collapsing. Hong Yi, who had already prepared hot water, brought it over. Cheng Yi went forward to untie her lord's belt and help him undress. When Chu Qingyin saw this, she remembered that Big Ice Cube was always the one who took care of his own clothes. Unless he wanted to tease her, he would ask her to do it herself. She had never seen him being served by anyone before. Hence, Chu Qingyin spoke up. "Cheng Yi, you can leave first. I can take care of His Highness here." Cheng Yi's outstretched hands paused, and she felt a little embarrassed. She smiled embarrassedly. "Little Wang Fei, you must have spent a lot of energy supporting Wang Ye all the way here. Why don't you go back and rest first? This servant and Hong Jiejie have served His Highness for many years. It is only right that we work for His Highness." Chu Qingyin raised an eyebrow. This person mentioned that she was the old person who served Big Ice Cube. She didn't know if it was intentional or not. But from her tone, it was like she was drawing a line between her and Big Ice Cube. It was a little grating. Chu Qingyin curved her lips into a smile. "You've worked hard for so many years. But I will have to get used to these things in the future. Right now, I'm just practicing in advance." After saying this, Chu Qingyin didn't wait for her reply and turned to Hong Yi to say, "Hong Yi, put down the hot water and towel. Go and work on tomorrow's trip." Cheng Yi was ignored like this. Hong Yi looked at Cheng Yi's sullen face and quickly put down the things. Then she gave Cheng Yi a look to leave with her. Changyi saw that Chu Qingyan had completely ignored her and could only leave unwillingly. But before she left, a trace of calculation flashed through her eyes that no one noticed. Chu Qingyan didn't miss the interaction between the two. She didn't care about this before because she wanted to be a rice worm who didn't care about the outside world. She only wanted to be an otaku to the end. But now, she had to keep her eyes and ears open because this marquee gate was too deep. If she wasn't careful, she would drown this rice worm. Xining happened to be looking for her and found this place. She immediately entered the door. "Master, why are you here? Is Lord drunk?" You came just in time. There's hot water over there. Give me the towel after you need it. I'll help His Highness wipe." Chu Qingyan stepped forward to help Xiao Su slightly pull open his lapel to make him more comfortable. When she turned to instruct Xining, her fingers accidentally touched the skin on his chest. So smooth. Chu Qingyan lowered her head and couldn't help but poke it. It seemed to be very elastic. TSK, TSK, TSK. As expected, he exercised regularly. Otherwise, how could his body be so strong and curvy? No, she was going to drool. "Cough, cough, mistress. Here's the towel." Xining couldn't help but cover her eyes. This love-struck woman in front of her wasn't her mistress. No, no. Her charming fantasy was pulled back by Xining's voice. Chu Qingyan hurriedly withdrew her gaze and said, "I didn't see anything." Xining cast her a suspicious look. Chu Qingyan gave a soft cough as she took the towel. She didn't look at how good his body was with her love-struck eyes, but seriously helped Big Ice Cube wipe. When the cloth brushed against his neck, Chu Qingyan suddenly felt a sense of déjà vu. It was as if she had done the same thing to someone before, and it had happened before she came to the ancient era. However, she could not recall it at that moment. She quickly cleaned up and pulled the blanket over him as she let out a soft sigh. At this time, Xining had already brought the water out. The room was very quiet with only the two of them. Chu Qingyan leaned against the bed as her eyes fell onto the person on the bed. This was her first time being alone in a room with Big Ice Cube sleeping peacefully, but she had to admit that Big Ice Cube's alcohol tolerance was quite good. Other people would go crazy after drinking, but he would be quiet after getting drunk. The soft candlelight shined on the mask on his face. The silver light shined and made her a bit dazzled. Suddenly, a bold idea flashed in her mind. She immediately sat up and stared at the mask like a tiger watching its prey. The night was dark and the wind was strong, so it was the best time to take off the mask. Chapter 171. It wasn't that she hadn't wondered what a masked face looked like before. She subconsciously felt that the Big Ice Cube's face shouldn't have been disfigured. In her free time in university, she would read a few transmigration novels. Many male protagonists used disfigurement to hide their true faces. She felt that the Big Ice Cube might be the same. She had tried many times to get the Big Ice Cube to take off his mask for her to see, but he would either ignore her or walk away by himself. So she didn't dare to speak again. Now that he was drunk and powerless, if she took the chance to take off his mask and put it back in place, she would be able to solve all her doubts. Wouldn't that be perfect? She licked her lips and slowly reached out her hand. Her heart was beating fast, as if she was unveiling the 18th birthday present her parents had given her. She was curious, expectant, and nervous. When her hand was about to touch the mask, his thick and long eyelashes moved slightly. She thought that he was about to wake up, so she quickly pulled her hand back in shock. But in the end, he was still deeply asleep. So it was a false alarm. Chu Qingyan let out a sigh of relief. Why did she feel a bit guilty? After a while, she reached out her hand again. This time it was very smooth. When her fingers touched the ice-cold mask, the Big Ice Cube didn't react at all. She gave a sly smile and gently used her fingers to pick up the mask. But when the mask slowly left the Big Ice Cube's face, her heart suddenly became confused. So what if she knew or didn't know the Big Ice Cube's true face? If his face was intact and not disfigured, what would she do? If his face was disfigured and changed beyond recognition, what would she do? Was his true face really that important? If his face was intact, the Big Ice Cube must have his reasons for not leaving his mask for 10 years. Why would she break this balance for her own selfish reasons? If his face was disfigured, then what right did she have to pick at his scars? Wasn't that just sprinkling salt on his wounds? Chu Qingyin, Chu Qingyin, when you talk to someone, it has nothing to do with looks, status, or wealth. Didn't you despise people who pry into other people's privacy? Why do you want to be the person you used to hate? She slowly retracted her hand. Her eyes suddenly became bright and clear, no longer clouded over. She had to respect the big ice cube. Unless he was conscious and willing to let her know, she would not do this secretly when he was unconscious. When she made this decision in her heart, she felt carefree all over. The sound of footsteps could be heard. Xining had returned. Master, do you want to rest? Tomorrow, they would leave the capital. This servant is worried that you won't have the energy tomorrow. Xining widened her almond eyes and asked with concern. Chu Qingyin smiled. I'll sit here for a while. The alcohol is surging up, and sometimes it's very uncomfortable. I'll go back to my room after a while. Xining nodded. Master's words are reasonable. Seeing her master staring at the Lord, she felt a little funny. Master, in so many years, this is the first time this servant has seen the Lord drunk. This topic aroused her interest. Could it be that the Lord rarely drank in the past? It's not that he rarely drank. It should be that he almost never touched alcohol. The servants in the Fu have never seen the Lord drunk before. Occasionally, he would come back from the palace banquets with the smell of alcohol, but that wasn't anything. Since her master had gradually gained a firm foothold in the Wangfu, Xining felt that as the most trusted subordinate of her master, it was necessary for her to grasp all kinds of information in the Wangfu. Moreover, it was mainly about the matters surrounding the Wangye, so that when her master needed it, it would come in handy. Now, she could talk about the Wangye's matters and accompany her master to relieve her boredom. Chu Qingyin nodded and turned to look at the person lying peacefully by her side. A trace of pity flashed through her eyes. Why was the person who rarely touched alcohol so drunk today? Was it because he was about to leave the capital and was reluctant? Or was it because of the emotions that had been suppressed for a long time that exploded? Big Ice Cube was a very strict person and was very self-disciplined. For him to have an emotional breakdown, how much pain did he have to endure for him to explode? It was hard for her to imagine. Actually, the straw that broke the camel's back was the straw. This trip to the Fuli mountain range seemed to be more than just mining for the Big Ice Cube. But her knowledge was limited and she couldn't analyze it, so she didn't have any clues right now. Perhaps she could ask Wu Ling and the others. It was already late at night, and she couldn't hold on any longer. Seeing the Big Ice Cube sleeping deeply, she was relieved and brought Xining back to her room. When the door was closed, the master and servant left. The person hiding in the corner slowly walked out. A trace of pride flashed in her eyes. She had finally waited until Chu Qingyin left. Then, after looking around to make sure no one was around, the orange dress slid across the wall as she silently approached Xiao Su's room step by step. Her jade-like fingers touched the door and gently pushed it open. She opened a small gap for a person to pass through and immediately went in. Then she quickly closed the door. Before Chu Qingyin left, she had blown out the candles on the table, so the room was a little dark. But the bright moonlight shone through the window and onto the ground, reflecting a weak light. When the person got used to the light, this little bit of light was enough to see everything in the room. She held her breath and felt that the person in the room had a stable breathing and was fast asleep. Her heart was filled with joy as she slowly walked towards the bed. She came to this room several times a day, so she was familiar with all the decorations. So she easily walked to Xiao Su's bed. The clear light shone on the person on the bed, giving off a sacred and inviolable feeling. His fine long hair was spread out on the bed, forming a sharp contrast with his smooth skin. It was as if there was an aura of abstinence. And those tightly closed eyes had thick and curly long eyelashes that made women envious. She hadn't seen his face, but she was already captivated by his elegance. The person in front of the bed was already mesmerized. If it was any other time, she wouldn't have dared to look at her master with such a bold gaze, because that would be offending her master. But now no one knew, and Lord was already asleep, so no one would come to disturb him. She suddenly gave a low and gloomy laugh. Tonight, she would definitely become one of His Highness's people. Otherwise, she didn't know when His Highness would return. If she waited until she was old, she would lose her value. As for Imperial Concubine Yu, she would probably be nothing more than an abandoned pawn. Originally, she didn't have any hope. But tonight, when Lord was drunk, it gave her a glimmer of hope. In order to survive, in order to obtain glory and wealth, she could only take risks. And the person on the bed was Lord, whom she had admired for a long time. Her desire to take him for herself was as crazy as grass. So, she couldn't wait to reach out to Xiao Su's belt. The moonlight was cold, but it illuminated her greedy eyes. She was Cheng-Yi, who believed that wealth came from danger. Chapter 172. Cheng-Yi held her breath. When her hand was about to touch that black belt, the person lying down suddenly opened his eyes. His sharp gaze was like the scorching sun piercing through the clouds. It was so dazzling that people couldn't help but close their eyes, not daring to meet his gaze. Cheng-Yi's fingers froze. It was like her pressure points had been pressed, and she didn't dare to move. Xiao Su's cold gaze swept over the person who was about to approach him. His finger moved, and the brocade quilt on his body flew up. The brocade quilt flew over, and before she could react, she felt like her entire body was bound. No matter how she struggled, she couldn't break free. Then a bad premonition floated in her mind. Xiao Su waved his hand, and Cheng-Yi was wrapped up by the brocade quilt that came like a bolt of lightning. Then she flew out. The door suddenly opened at this time, and Cheng-Yi flew out of the room with the quilt. Before she could cry out, she had already smashed into the ground outside. Xiao Su stood up and brushed the creases on his clothes. Hearing the uncontrollable moans coming from outside, he coldly narrowed his eyes. Touching this kind of person was simply dirtying his hands. When he walked out of the room, Hualing was already standing by the door. Master, Cheng-Yi, who had fallen to the ground, was sobbing in pain. When she heard Hualing's salute, she immediately endured the pain and struggled to get up. Trembling, she knelt at the bottom of the steps and explained, "Your Highness, you've misunderstood this servant. This servant didn't mean to disturb your rest. This servant only wanted to go in and see if you were sleeping well. This servant was worried that you would feel uncomfortable in the middle of the night when you were drunk. So," Xiao Su expressionlessly cut her off. "Is that so?" Even though she knew that His Highness was already suspicious, she still didn't let go of the chance to beg for mercy. She quickly nodded. "Your Highness, it's true. This servant isn't lying. This servant can swear to the heavens. The moon is my witness." Xiao Su thought of something the little fellow had once said, and couldn't help but throw it back at her. "What makes you think that if you swear on the fickle moon, this prince will believe you?" Cheng-Yi had a bad premonition in her heart. His Highness wasn't planning on letting her go tonight. She couldn't help but panic in her heart. She crawled forward a few steps with her hands on the ground. Tears quickly flowed down her face. "Your Highness, Cheng-Yi has followed you for so many years and has always been loyal to you. How could I take advantage of this opportunity to harm you? You must believe this servant." "Your Highness." When Xiao Su heard this, he sneered. "When did this prince say that you were unruly?" Cheng-Yi's heart skipped a beat. She actually confessed without being pressed? Xiao Su didn't give her a chance to find an excuse. At this time, he looked directly at Cheng-Yi, who was kneeling at the bottom of the steps. "If it weren't for the fact that you've followed me for so many years, your life would have been in danger the moment you stepped through the door. Without this prince's permission, you casually entered this prince's room in the middle of the night. Have you been following the rules for so many years for nothing?" Cheng-Yi lowered her head and tightly gripped her skirt with both hands. She recalled that 8 years ago, when she was selected to train in the King of England's manor, the instructor's first lesson was to make them memorize the 4 imperfections. One of them was that they weren't allowed to enter the Lord's room in the middle of the night. For so many years, these senior servant girls had scrupulously abided by their duties, afraid of violating the rules set by the Lord. But tonight, she clearly violated the rules. Tonight, she cut off all means of retreat. She didn't have a foolproof plan, so her lies were full of holes. She gritted her teeth. Her usually sharp and unkind teeth were hard to justify in front of the gloomy lord. Her heart couldn't help but tremble. Her whole body couldn't help but tremble. Usually, as long as the lord gave them a look, they wouldn't dare to say a word. But now, the lord was in a rage. How could her small body withstand it? The lord, Chang'e, if it wasn't for the fact that you haven't made any mistakes in all these years, this prince wouldn't have touched you. Xiao Su suddenly spoke. Chang'e raised her head and looked at the godlike person in front of her in confusion and horror. Lord, what are you talking about? This servant doesn't understand a single word. Hua Ling, who was standing to the side, couldn't help but interject angrily. Chang'e, you keep calling the Lord your master, but do you think the Lord doesn't know who you're working for? Don't think that we can't dig out the person behind you just because they're hidden deep. Chang'e, His Highness originally saw that you didn't do anything wrong and turned a blind eye, but that went to inform your master. Do you think we are blind? Chang'e was dumbfounded. She had been secretly keeping in contact with Consort Yu. She thought she was doing it secretly, but she didn't expect the Lord to see through her. Hua Ling continued angrily. Chang'e, I thought you were honest, but I didn't expect you to bite the hand that feeds you. Tonight, you sneaked in a master's room. Do you think we don't know what you're up to? Xiao Lai's riders were either the type who didn't care about appearances, such as Turin, or the type who focused on technology, such as Wood Spirit, or the type who was exquisite and enchanting, such as Water Spirit, or the type who was calm and collected, such as Ethereal, or the type who laughed and cursed all the time like Hua Ling. However, these were all their disguises. They were used to life and death, and were only loyal to Xiao Su. They didn't care about what happened in the outside world. If they encountered this kind of situation on a normal day, Hua Ling would have already taken care of it. However, this person had followed the Lord for many years. But in the end, he played the blame game and ignited the anger in his heart. What he hated the most was betrayal. Master had been betrayed by a close relative in the past, which was why he was so cold. Master didn't care about Chang'e's betrayal, but he couldn't swallow this anger. The companion he had spent so much time with was betrayed once again. This kind of feeling made his heart feel like it was being cut by a knife. He really felt bad for Master. Seeing the figure in the corner of the hallway, Xiao Su lightly said, "Take her away and interrogate her." With these words, her fate was already decided. Chang'e immediately kowtowed and said, "Lord, this servant had no choice. This servant didn't want to. I beg the Lord to show mercy. I beg the Lord to take into account that this servant has served you for so many years and spare this servant. Lord." Xiao Su turned around. This action already expressed his meaning. Chang'e couldn't help feeling despair, but she still kept crying and begging for mercy. Hua Ling went forward and sealed her mute acupuncture point. Then two black-clothed people appeared and dragged her away. The figure in the corner slowly walked over. The moonlight soaked her body bit by bit until it illuminated the tranquil expression on her face. Xiao Su watched as the little fellow yawned and walked closer. The gloominess on his face slowly dissipated. "We still have to leave tomorrow. Hurry and go rest. Let Hua Ling and the others take care of these things." She didn't ask what happened and didn't look at Chang'e, who was being dragged away. She said this in a daze. He stroked the little fellow's head and replied. Chu Qingyan looked at the servants who ran out because of this big commotion and slightly raised her eyebrows. Originally, Big Eyes could directly take them down, but he insisted on taking care of them outside the room. Was he doing this for these people to see? Killing the chicken before leaving to warn the monkeys? Then in this king of England's palace, how many more spies were planted? Chapter 173. Xiao Su called for a servant to bring a cloak. Taking it, he put it on the little fellow's shoulders and then tied it in a knot. Hua Ling, who had ordered people to take Chang'e away, turned around and saw this loving scene. He shook his head and thought inside, Master was becoming more and more skilled at doing these things. Did he really treat little Wang Fei as his own daughter? The image of his 10-year-old master holding the baby-sized little princess appeared in his mind. Hua Ling immediately trembled from his own thoughts. No, it must be that he hadn't rested well recently for him to have these random thoughts. Huo Ling patted his head. He decided to go sleep. Big Ice Cube, good night. She wouldn't ask about these things, but that didn't mean she couldn't see what was happening. Chu Qingyan coldly swept her eyes over the people in the yard and sneered in a low voice. If there were any other small movements that dared to hurt the Big Ice Cube, then this girl would deal with them when this girl came back from mining. The next day, Chu Qingyan appeared in male clothing in front of Xiao Su. Xiao Su turned and saw the clothes she was wearing and couldn't help but feel it was familiar. Seeing the Big Ice Cube's slightly surprised expression, Chu Qingyan proudly spun in a circle in front of him and then asked, "How is it? Your clothes from more than 10 years ago fit me well, don't they?" Xiao Su faintly looked at her and mercilessly attacked. "Ben Wang's clothes when he was 8 years old. On you who is almost 11 years old. It does fit you well." Being looked down upon for her height, Chu Qingyan puffed out her cheeks and then deflated. It was true that compared to the Big Ice Cube, she was a bit short. But she was a girl who was almost 11 years old that was as tall as her. "Stand up." She promised she wouldn't beat you to death. Xiao Su didn't pay attention to her dejected little face. He turned to Hong Yi and asked, "Why did you give Wang Fei old clothes? Could it be that Ben Wang can't even afford this little bit of silver?" Chu Qingyan's stabbed heart suddenly healed. She licked her lips. Last night, he caught the traitor as an example, and this morning he was going to give her a proper status? It seemed like it wasn't that the Big Ice Cube didn't know about the inner residence. He just didn't want to interfere normally. Chi. The Big Ice Cube was hiding his strength. However, this matter really had nothing to do with Hong Yi. When Chu Qingyan saw Hong Yi's awkward expression and didn't know how to answer, she immediately explained, "Don't blame Hong Yi. I wanted to wear them." Hearing this, Xiao Su raised his eyebrows and looked at her. Hearing her words, if the clothes were intact, they could be passed down to the next generation as family heirlooms. Xiao Su patted her little head, "And if you need anything in the future, just tell me. This prince doesn't lack this bit of money, as long as you're happy." Chu Qingyan was confused. Why did the Big Ice Cube give off the feeling of a domineering CEO when he said this? A large fish pond suddenly appeared in front of her eyes. "Look, you've taken over the entire fish pond. Haha, what a wild imagination." Fortunately, she stopped this illusion in time. All right, how could she miss out on this opportunity when the Big Ice Cube opened his mouth? For the sake of her future life as a rice worm, they were going to set off in an hour. Xiao Su was sipping his tea quietly while Chu Qingyan was busy going through the things that they had brought along with them. Xiao Su's gaze finally landed on her body. When she wore this fine brocade dress, he felt that she had grown a lot in the past half year. Her long hair was tied up high, black like a waterfall flowing down. Her facial features were distinct, and her small face was exquisite. She looked exactly like a noble young master. The 11-year-old her seemed to see himself when he was 8 years old. He sipped his tea. Work hard, struggle, and strive to improve. The happy childhood that he hadn't had time to experience, he would give it to the little fellow. He would enjoy the 2 times together. His thin lips slowly hooked up, and the smoke curled up. Su-yi dispersed the sorrow of parting. A faint thought appeared in his mind. It seemed like his family's daughter was slowly growing up. Xiao Su shook his head, feeling that it was a bit funny. Because they were going out to carry out a mission and not sightseeing, there was no need for any extravagance, so they couldn't bring many people. However, the Big Ice Cube had given her the task of choosing people early on. She had also chosen carefully. She couldn't do without people around her, but one Xining was enough. She couldn't eat without Huang Yi. Moreover, she heard that the Big Ice Cube had 2 maidservants by his side. One was Lu Yi, who was in charge of accommodation, and the other was Qing Yi, who was in charge of travel. Louis had returned home to visit relatives and was returning home today. Qing Yi usually didn't stay in the inner courtyard, so she had never seen her before. However, since these 2 were in charge of the mission, she felt that the Big Ice Cube would need them this time, so she brought them along. Lonnie was gentle and weak, so it was fine. Ziyi hadn't come out yet, so there was still Hong Yi. However, she didn't know why, but Hong Yi, who always had a gentle smile and was highly respected by the servants, had a trace of vigilance in her heart. She didn't know why, because a woman's sixth sense was always inexplicable, but it was surprisingly accurate. Moreover, the management of the inner courtyard couldn't be done without Hong Yi, so she arranged for her to be fully in charge of the inner courtyard. Hong Yi didn't show any emotion, and still had a gentle expression on her face as she took care of the management matters. So on this trip, she brought the Big Ice Cube's 3 maidservants with him. They couldn't lack food, shelter, and transportation. Then there were a few second-grade maidservants and a few manservants. Adding everything together, there were around 10 people. Before leaving, she gathered all the stewards and servants in the palace. She was just explaining the following matters and beating up the servants who wanted to slack off when their masters weren't here. Hualing and the others who came out with their bags saw the little princess give a proper lecture, and they all gave her a thumbs up. After the lecture, Chu Qingyan directed everyone to move the boxes onto the carriage. Everything was done in an orderly manner, and there was no need for anyone to worry about it. Hualing and the others gave her a thumbs up in their hearts. When they were about to get on the carriage, Chu Qingyan also saw Lve and Qingyi. Lve was gentle and polite while Qingyi was lively. The two of them bowed to her, and Chu Qingyan secretly looked them over before arranging a carriage for them. Anyway, they had all been trained, so they knew what to do on the road better than her, so she didn't need to waste her breath. Everything was prepared. Set out. Hualing rode his horse in front, and there were guards on both sides of the carriage. Each person had a serious expression, but they were dressed like normal servants. They walked casually, but if someone who understood the layout saw this, they would be surprised to find that although these people didn't seem to have any order in their movements, no matter where someone attacked, they would be blocked outside. Hong Yi was standing at the door sending them off. She watched the carriages leave, and her eyes were as cold as ice. After finishing everything, Chu Qingyan, who was lying down in the carriage, looked at Xiao Su, who was leisurely reading a book, and her heart suddenly felt a bit unbalanced. Big Ice Cube, my hands and feet are sore. Quickly give me a massage. Chapter 174. Chui Chui? Xiao Su's gaze shifted from the book to her. Chu Qingyan suddenly felt as if she was possessed by ice and immediately changed the topic. She coughed lightly to cover it up. No, I didn't say anything. You heard wrongly. Xiao Su felt that it was a little funny when he heard that. He then shifted his gaze back to the book. Chu Qingyan heaved a sigh of relief. She leaned against the wall of the carriage and rubbed her arms. She was fantasizing about her upcoming life. Although Big Ice Cube was going to mine, the Sichuan Emperor did not give him a time limit, so she could grind Big Ice Cube along the way and swim down the mountain to play in the water. Wouldn't that be perfect? But she didn't know if Big Ice Cube, this workaholic, would agree to her request. She rubbed her arms and couldn't help but feel vexed. It wasn't easy for her to come out. She wanted to take a good look at this era that spanned 1,000 years and see what kind of scenery there was. Xiao Su, who was flipping through the book, couldn't help but hold his forehead when he heard this sigh. Come here. Suddenly hearing someone speak, Chu Qingyan raised her head to look at the person in front of her. Are you calling me? There's a third person in the carriage? Xiao Su looked at her. Oh! Chu Qingyan moved over. Although there was only her and Big Ice Cube, the carriage was very big. It could accommodate at least 5 or 6 people. She moved over with difficulty and looked up at him curiously. Stretch out your hand. Xiao Su ordered. Oh! Chu Qingyan, who was still thinking about playing in the mountains and swimming in the water, gave an order. Xiao Su stretched out his hand to hold her little arm. His fingertips wandered around her acupuncture points and gently tapped. The strength was just right, but his expression was still cold and indifferent. It was as if he wasn't helping the little fellow in front of him to relax her muscles and bones, but was wiping his sword. Chu Qingyan didn't expect Big Ice Cube to be so obedient and help her. She was secretly delighted. After rubbing with her other hand, she turned around. There's more! There's more! Xiao Su smiled. His fingers landed on her shoulder and moved slowly. Chu Qingyan felt a warm current flowing out from his nimble fingertips and into her blood vessels. The blocked meridians were unblocked bit by bit, and she felt refreshed all over. After everything was done, she couldn't wait to turn around and ask, "Big Ice Cube, were you using your internal energy to unblock my meridians?" Xiao Su replied indifferently. Then he picked up the book that was placed at the side and continued to flip through it. Chu Qingyin's interest was piqued. She turned around and asked, "Big Ice Cube, is your inner strength very high? Was his martial arts very powerful? Could it be that if one possessed inner strength, they would be able to regulate their own breathing? For example, I can circulate my qi to reduce my fatigue when I'm tired." All of a sudden, all the questions came pouring out like beans. Xiao Su glanced at her and felt that these questions could be ignored. "Do you want to learn?" Chu Qingyin's widened eyes immediately sparkled. She nodded without hesitation. "Then from today onwards, if the carriage is resting, you can practice martial arts." Chu Qingyin shuddered. The scenery along the way was so beautiful, and she was just going to stay there and practice martial arts? No, I think it's better to forget about it. Xiao Su seemed to have expected this. He shook his head and glanced at her. Then, he looked away and continued to read his book. She puffed up her cheeks. She felt that she had been despised by the Big Ice Cube, but she really didn't want to waste this good time on practicing martial arts, okay? She had been despised by the Big Ice Cube many times anyway, so it didn't matter if it happened one more time or one less time. Xiao Su glanced at a certain someone who had given up on herself and calmly turned the page. Inside the palace, Sichuan Emperor was reviewing memorials when eunuch Xiao entered the hall and reported, "Your Majesty, His Royal Highness has left the capital." Sichuan Emperor put down the memorials in his hands and rubbed his forehead. "We understand." Seeing this, eunuch Xiao immediately asked, "Your Majesty, are you tired? Do you want to rest?" "No need." Sichuan Emperor shook his head. His gaze fell outside the window. It was in the direction of the city gate that Xiao Su had left. He had a faint premonition that he had made an unwise decision this time. But once he decided on something, he would not allow it to be changed. At this moment, a eunuch outside the hall announced loudly, "Consort Yu has arrived." Consort Yu, dressed in a pleated moon dress, leisurely entered the hall. "Your Majesty, I have boiled a cup of ginseng soup for you. Please drink it while it is hot." Consort Yu's voice was gentle and soft. There was a sweet hint of annoyance in her voice, and the smile on her face was just right. Sichuan Emperor was pleased to hear this. He reached out and took her in front of him. He said sympathetically, "You can just ask the palace maids to do these trivial things. Why do you have to do it yourself?" Consort Yu smiled gently. "Your Majesty, how can I let an outsider serve you? Moreover, this is a high-quality 100-year-old ginseng from my maiden family. I am afraid that the palace maids will not be able to make it well. Wouldn't it be a waste of the ginseng?" Consort Yu was very careful with her words. She had only mentioned the Fu family in front of Sichuan Emperor, so it did not seem deliberate. Sichuan Emperor's tiredness dissipated. He patted the back of her hand and sighed. "Your parents are very considerate. It must have been hard on you." Consort Yu covered her mouth and chuckled. She blinked and said coquettishly, "Your Majesty, what are you talking about? You are my heaven, my earth, and my support. It is only right for me to do these things for you. Moreover, the Fu family has always been loyal to the Sichuan imperial family. Your Majesty, you don't have to be so courteous with me." Sichuan Emperor was very pleased to hear this. He reached out and pinched Consort Yu's cheek. He said in a flirtatious tone, "I will go to your place tonight." Consort Yu's fair face was instantly dyed red. She lowered her eyes and punched Sichuan Emperor's chest. She said angrily, "Your Majesty is so mean." The West Xian Emperor burst into laughter as soon as he finished speaking. After a while, Consort Yu looked at Sichuan Emperor, who was drinking the ginseng soup. She asked casually, "Your Majesty, why are you sending His Royal Highness to Fu Li Mountain Range? It is quite far away. It will be a difficult journey. Why don't you send the other officials?" Hearing this, Sichuan Emperor put down the bowl of soup. Consort Yu immediately handed him a handkerchief. Sichuan Emperor took it and wiped the corners of his mouth. He looked at Consort Yu, who had a confused look on her face, and said slowly, "You are still so considerate of Su, but he might not appreciate it. Your Majesty, what are you saying? His Royal Highness is your flesh and blood. I also see him as my own child. It is natural for me to care about him." Consort Yu shook her head with a smile. Sichuan Emperor smiled. Then his eyes turned cold. It is not convenient for us to tell you this, but you have to believe that we are making plans for Ranner. Consort Yu narrowed her eyes. What was it that made His Majesty so secretive? However, she didn't reveal any of her thoughts on her face. She continued to serve him with all her heart. But her heart had already turned 100 times. No matter what His Majesty was planning, she had to make sure that Xiao Su would never return. Chapter 175. Perhaps this was the difference between her and Empress Liang. One was expressionless while the other showed all her emotions on her face. Men always like the cute and lovable type, so it was destined that Empress Liang would not be able to beat Consort Yu. Eunuch Xiao had already left when Consort Yu went in. When he heard the teasing from inside, he sighed in his heart. In this inner palace, although the concubines were all treated equally, only Consort Yu could receive this kind of treatment. She was favored by the inner palace and received the emperor's love. He raised his head to look at the city gates with a bit of pity in his heart. His Royal Highness, take care of yourself. The carriage traveled for half a day before stopping to rest. There was a small lake nearby, and at this time, the servants took out pots, bowls, ladles, basins, and other utensils from the carriage. Hualing saw this scene when he got off the horse and jumped in fright. He asked Huang Yi, who was in charge, "Did you move the entire kitchen?" Huang Yi patted the dust off her hands and replied with a smile, "This was ordered by the little princess. I'm just following orders. However, you also know that I'm in charge of the food. If I don't have these utensils, how can I cook for everyone?" So when the little princess had her prepare the utensils, she had raised both her hands and feet in agreement. Hualing clicked his tongue. The little princess was truly a foodie. Xiao Su got off the carriage and saw the servants methodically burning the fire and cutting the vegetables. He raised a brow. "You ordered this?" Chu Qingyan giggled. She never thought of hiding it because as long as it was time to eat, these things would be exposed. She said with a smile, "Big ice cube, people are made of iron and rice is made of steel. If I don't eat, I'll be hungry. So, these are all necessities for a long trip." "Oh no, it's for a long trip to mine, so I brought them along." Xiao Su poured a bucket of cold water on her. "You brought them along with you in a carriage?" "Cuckoo," Chu Qingyan complained. "Can you not tear me down like this? If you have the skills, don't eat it later." However, she wouldn't dare to say this out loud, even if she was beaten to death, because the one who wouldn't be able to eat it later would probably be her. At this time, Hualing walked over and overheard the conversation between the two masters. He couldn't help but explain, "Little princess, in another 2 or 3 days, we will probably enter a desolate place. I'm afraid that when we get there won't be any ingredients to cook. That's why Lord is worried that these things will become a burden and can't be used." Chu Qingyan couldn't help but smile. "Hualing, I've studied the map. I've considered all of this, so don't worry." Hualing nodded when he heard this. Little Princess Consort was becoming more and more methodical, so he was not worried. "By the way, where is Turin? Why didn't I see him along the way?" Chu Qingyan looked around, but she still couldn't find him. Normally, he was always inseparable from Hualing. Why did he disappear the moment he left the city? Hualing smiled mysteriously. "Little princess, it's because this subordinate is an open guard and Turin is a secret guard." Chu Qingyan immediately understood what he meant when he told her to stop. Hualing was the guard that followed by Big Ice Cube's side, and Turin was hidden in the shadows, responsible for protecting it from the shadows. She thought about it and then turned to say to Xining, "Go and take out some of the food we prepared yesterday and give it to Hualing." Hualing watched in confusion as Xining left. When she came back, there was a white cloth bag in her hand. "This is?" Hualing took the white cloth bag and opened it to take a look. He found that there were 2 small bags inside. One bag was steamed buns that were cut to the thickness of a palm, and the other bag seemed to be dried meat. Chu Qingyin saw his surprise and couldn't help laughing as she said, "Give the things to Turin and tell him to take out 2 steamed buns and a piece of meat. Use the steamed buns to hold the meat and it's ready to eat. This is called rujiamo. If possible, you can heat up the rujiamo in the fire. The taste will be even better." Hualing looked at the things in the bag in disbelief. This was his first time hearing this method of eating. It felt so fresh, he would secretly try it later. That's right, I don't know how many people he has with him. If it's not enough, I'll send people to get more. There's a lot, so there's no need to worry about not having enough. Moreover, I've already taught Huang Yi how to make these jerkies. When we rest on the road, she will roast the meat and hang it on the roof of the carriage to dry. You guys will be responsible for looking after it when the time comes. Don't let the birds take it away. Chu Qingyin thought about it and casually said this. Since Turin was in the shadows, he definitely wouldn't show himself to eat with them, so they could only wrong them like this. Hualing turned around to look at the nailed roofs of the carriages. No wonder the little princess ordered Hualing to remake the carriages, so it was for this reason. It had to be said that the little princess had done all she could to eat, but this was also good. They would have enough food on the road, so they wouldn't have to eat steamed buns every day like before. Thinking of this, Hualing's heart was filled with tears. It really was good to have a head wife. Woo-woo, little princess, how good would it be if you appeared earlier? We've been eating stone like steamed buns for several years now. So Hualing was willing to be a diligent worker, drying the meat for free. But if Chu Qingyin knew what he was thinking right now, she would spit out 3 liters of blood. Appear earlier? How early? She didn't want to transmigrate as a baby and not be able to take care of herself. She followed Hualing's gaze to look at the carriages. Actually, she had spent quite a bit of effort on these carriages. Was it just drying meat? No, it wasn't that simple. The retired emperor sat in the chair prepared by the servants. He stroked his beard and laughed. I say, grandson, you've picked up a treasure. Such a thrifty and diligent wife. It's rare to meet one. It was like this was a marriage bestowed by this one, and he loved to praise this one. Xiao Su ignored him. His eyes swept over the nailed roofs of the carriages, and then he looked at the folding chairs in front of him as he fell in a deep thought. At this time, Hualing walked over and said in a voice filled with admiration, Master, the little princess is truly smart. This subordinate never thought of the structure of these carriages. Not only can they be used to dry things, they can also be used to defend against sneak attacks. The 2 ends of the nails were specially made sharp. If someone took the chance to land on them, they would experience the feeling of being pierced by needles. Moreover, this subordinate never thought that the chair could be made into a foldable shape. When it is needed, it can be opened. When it is not needed, it can be folded and put away. It does not take up space and is convenient to carry. Young Princess Consort's idea is really novel. Turin's eyes lit up. He was already the only one in the world of creativity. Now that he saw the little princess reveal this skill, he was instantly filled with passion. It was rare to hear Turin praise someone so sincerely. The people under him were all leaders in their own fields. Although they didn't think they were extraordinary, they still had their own pride. It could be seen that this little fellow really hid his strength well. A faint smile appeared in Xiao Su's eyes. But on the following road, Chu Qingyin's actions made everyone's jaws drop again and again. Chapter 176. Chu Qingyin walked to the resting area and saw that Big Ice Cube and Imperial Grandfather were both sitting on the chairs specially made for her by the Wood Spirit. Her heart was filled with joy. However, the moment she sat down, she saw Imperial Grandfather's cheeks puffed up. She didn't know what he was chewing, but when she saw the minced meat at the corner of his mouth, her face instantly darkened. Imperial Grandfather, you want to get a Rujiamo to eat? The Emperor Emeritus immediately shook his head. Even if he was beaten to death, he wouldn't admit that someone of his noble status would do something like stealing food. Chu Qingyin sighed. Imperial Grandfather, you're too fast. I originally wanted to teach you another way to eat. The Emperor Emeritus's eyes emitted a green light, like a hungry wolf that saw its prey. He forcefully swallowed the food in his mouth and impatiently said, What other way to eat? Quickly say it. As soon as he finished speaking, the Emperor Emeritus felt that he had been tricked because the yin lass in front of him was looking at him with disdain. The Emperor Emeritus smashed his bowl in dissatisfaction and turned to his grandson for help. Su, quickly control your lass. She's so impudent. She dares to treat her elders like this now. Who knows if she'll dare to make you starve in the future? Xiao Su looked at him indifferently. Grandson won't steal food. A bolt from the blue. His grandson had turned evil and was led astray by his little wife. He was full of grievances and quietly muttered, "Isn't it just stealing a Rigiamo? So petty." Chu Qingyan looked at the Emperor Emeritus, who was drawing circles on the side, and couldn't help but find it funny. She felt that she needed to explain, so she took the soup that Huang Yi had scooped and handed it to him. She said with a smile, "Imperial Grandfather, the Rigiamo is too dry. It won't be too late to eat it after drinking some soup. Otherwise, it won't be good if you choke." The Emperor Emeritus smelled the fragrance, and the haze on his face cleared away. "Yin lass, we know you're the best." Chu Qingyan felt that this Emperor Emeritus really was like an old urchin and couldn't help but say, "In the future, you can take whatever you want to eat. Don't be polite." The Emperor Emeritus immediately glanced at her, lowered his eyes, and asked in a small and uncertain voice, "Really?" Seeing how careful he was, Chu Qingyan's heart softened. She nodded seriously. "Yes." The retired emperor's eyes widened, his face beaming with joy. He immediately turned to Gu Rong and said, "Help me move the pastries from the last carriage to my carriage." Chu Qingyan almost hit her head on the tree behind her. Fortunately, Big Ice Cube was quick enough to hold her head. Gu Rong was a personal guard assigned by Xiao Su to the retired emperor. The retired emperor waved at her. "Yin lass, thank you." Looking at the Emperor Emeritus's complacent appearance, Chu Qingyan couldn't help but admit that the older the ginger, the spicier it was. She was still too naive. She would never play with him again. Humph! When Xiao Su saw this, for some reason he felt like laughing. It was a rare sight for him to see his family in such a harmonious and joyful manner. "Big Ice Cube, I prepared some non-sweet pastries for you. I had intended for you to pass the time on the road, but I'm afraid you can only drink tea to accompany the air." Chu Qingyan looked at the cloth bags that Gu Rong was carrying in her hands, in her arms and on her shoulders. She couldn't help but turn to him and sighed. Xiao Su laughed in spite of himself as he patted her head. "It's fine." Chu Qingyan turned to look at the Emperor Emeritus, who was happily drinking his soup, and couldn't help but smile. Having an old man at home was like having a treasure. After the group finished their lunch, they rested for a while and prepared to set off. Just at this moment, a man dressed in black appeared in front of Xiao Su. "Master, the carriages have already left the city in different directions according to your request. The people inside have all changed their appearances so that no one will notice the difference." Xiao Su calmly replied. Chu Qingyan pondered in her heart when she heard this. When they left the city gates today, she discovered that there were more than 10 carriages following behind them, but in the end, they all disappeared. She thought that it should be the Big Ice Cube smokescreen. No one knew what would happen along the way, so it was best to be careful. But what made her feel even more uneasy was that when she left the city gates, there was a voice in her subconscious that warned her of danger. She closed her eyes, since they were already out of the city, then let nature take its course. She had a strong backing by her side, so she wasn't afraid. At this moment, Xiao Su had already entered the carriage. When he saw the little fellow's scrunched-up face, he couldn't help but ask, "Are you still angry at Imperial Grandfather for taking away all the pastries?" When Chu Qingyan heard that, she regained her senses and smiled slyly. "How am I such a petty person? Moreover, when we reach Jiangnan in a few days, we can buy whatever delicious food we want. When that time comes, if Imperial Grandfather can't finish the pastries in the carriage, he won't be allowed to eat the newly bought pastries. It's very shameful to waste food." Xiao Su shook his head. "That's right, you're not petty at all." After eating and drinking her fill, Chu Qingyan lazily leaned against the wall of the carriage, listening to the Big Ice Cube teasing her. She shrugged her shoulders. It wasn't that she wanted to make things difficult for retired emperor, but she felt that he had hidden too many secrets from her. She would probably encounter countless hardships in the future. It was too much. However, everything was just for fun. Retired Emperor was like an old urchin, and she liked to play with him. At this moment, Gu Rong's voice sounded from outside the carriage. Young princess consort, retired emperor invites you to taste the pastries together. Chu Qingyin looked up in surprise. At this time, the pastries had already been handed over. After Chu Qingyin received them, she inspected the pastries to see if there were any problems. After confirming that there were no problems, she picked up a piece of plum jade cake and put it in her mouth. She was puzzled as she asked the person in front of her, Imperial grandfather's behavior seems a bit strange. Did he suddenly have a conscience? But it was a bit impossible. He regarded pastries as his life and was wild with joy just now. He was simply like an ancient version of Granddad Ah. Xiao Su hit the nail on the head. Imperial grandfather came back to his senses and felt that you had a trick up your sleeve, so he offered the pastries to show his sincerity. He hopes that you will be lenient in the future. Fuck. Chu Qingyin couldn't swallow the pastry in her mouth. She looked at the 3 pieces of pastries on the plate. She only had 4 thumb-sized plum jade cakes in her mouth. It was rare for Imperial grandfather to make a move. Even if he wanted to bribe someone, he shouldn't do it like this. Ah. Do you think it's too late for me to retreat now? It's already too late. Sob sob. Chu Qingyin felt that she had been hit again and again. She needed to be comforted. Looking at the little fellow who had fallen head first into his arms, Xiao Su gently patted her head. After thinking about it, perhaps Imperial grandfather's idea of traveling together was a good idea. At least it could slowly train the little fellow's IQ. Thus, His Royal Highness, who was usually protective of his own, decided that in the future he would not intervene in the battle of wits between the little fellow and Imperial grandfather. If Chu Qingyin knew what Xiao Su was thinking at this time, she would probably vomit blood. Fighting with the retired emperor to improve her IQ? And then he would watch with folded arms? Could he not be so heartless? Thus, the whole journey passed by in such a way. Chu Qingyin and the others welcomed the first night outside of the capital. As night fell, the residence of the King of England welcomed a group of mysterious people. Chapter 177. It was already late at night, but the quiet King of England's palace was not calm at this time. On top of the high wall, dozens of black shadows leaped up. The person in the lead was dressed in purple. His demonic eyes swept across the palace that was somewhat hazy under the light of the lanterns, and the corners of his mouth curled into an ambiguous smile. The night was dark and the wind was strong. It was the best time to make a move. He gently waved his hand, and the black-robed people following him were like arrows that left the bow. They quickly scattered to every corner of the palace like ghosts, and no one noticed them. Higashio Motetsu looked at the inner courtyard of the King of England's palace that was not as guarded as last time and raised his brows. As expected, he had to search when Xiao Su was not here. This time, he brought the best hidden guards who were good at Qinggong. They were very good at hiding, so it was not a problem for them to hide from the guards inside. So he swept his eyes over the direction and flew towards the study. Success or failure, it all depended on this one move. At this time, Chu Qingyin's group had stopped to rest. The fire was burning. Hualing arranged for guards to take turns. Right now, in this place where there were no villages or shops, safety was very important because it was said that bandits often appeared here. Moreover, at night, fierce beasts would appear, so Hualing did not dare relax his vigilance. It was already late autumn and the night was very cold, so it was not suitable to sleep in the carriage. But Chu Qingyin was already prepared. She ordered people to take out the things in the carriage. At first, no one knew what it was, but when Mu Ling ordered people to prop it up on the ground, everyone was surprised to find that these things could be propped up and turned into tents. Chu Qingyin nodded her head in satisfaction. Back in the king's residence, she had only described the appearance and material of the item to the wood spirit, and the wood spirit had actually been able to understand it and make it in an instant. As expected, the big ice cube subordinates were indeed powerful. This kind of tent was modeled after the modern world's camping tents. The fabric was made from Sichuan's special ink yarn. It was not easy to get wind and was light. It was simply a necessity for traveling at home. The Emperor Emeritus patrolled the area with his hands behind his back. He stroked his beard and said to Chu Qingyin out of the blue, "Yin lass, the things you have there are really not bad." Chu Qingyin blushed with shame. "Imperial grandfather, is it really good for you to say it out loud?" When Xiao Su heard this, he turned to look at her. She immediately played dead. "All right, I'll sleep here tonight." The retired emperor simply didn't care about Chu Qingyin's predicament. He chose a tent and immediately went in. He even sighed comfortably. Chu Qingyin and Xiao Su each chose a tent and went to rest. It was late at night. Outside, there was only the sound of the burning firewood and the whistling of the mountain wind. The night was still quiet. Xiao Su was lying in the tent. His body was covered with a blanket that had been basked in the sun. He could still feel the warmth of the sun. He slightly hooked his lips. He had to admit that this little fellow, in this short day, had given him too many unexpected surprises. Just as he was about to fall asleep, he suddenly heard a series of footsteps slowly approaching from the side. Then, he saw a shadow reflected on his tent through the firelight. Finally, the shadow hesitated outside for a moment before raising its hand and patting his tent lightly. "Big Ice Cube, can I sleep with you tonight?" At this moment, in the King of England's residence, the black-clothed men were conducting a carpet search. Higashio Motetsu had just landed by the study's window when two shadow guards dropped down from the beam and waved their swords at him. Higashio Motetsu didn't expect that even if Xiao Su had taken away the elites, there would still be such powerful shadow guards in his residence. However, he was already prepared. He pulled out the folding fan at his waist and lightly blocked one of the shadow guard's swords. He dodged sideways, and the other shadow guard's sword was also avoided. At this moment, Daunting Wang Yu's eyes flashed with a hint of evilness. The folding fan that he used to block the blades suddenly opened. Coincidentally, the evening wind blew, and the powder on the folding fan flew towards the two shadow guards. The shadow guards couldn't dodge in time and were hit by the powder, falling to the ground. From the moment they landed to the end of the three people's fight, it was only a blink of an eye. A fight between experts was so fast. It didn't alarm anyone. Higashio Motetsu put away the folding fan and shook his head. "This young lord doesn't like to use swords and knives the most. It affects my demeanor too much." Thus, he leaped over the two of them and leaped into the study through the window. There was no candlelight in the study. He could only distinguish the layout of the room through the bright moonlight. He walked to the desk and flipped through the documents on it. He looked carefully and then turned to the bookshelf and flipped through the books one by one. He looked around to see if there were any hidden mechanisms or hidden corners. Although the fight just now was silent, it was inevitable that someone would pass by later and his heart would be exposed. So he still had to be nimble. But after searching for half a day, he found nothing. He couldn't help but squint. Could it be that it wasn't here? At this moment, he felt someone approaching. His eyes darkened, and he turned to put the things on the desk away. But when his fingers touched a wooden box, he paused. He was so focused on looking that he didn't notice what was inside. He only remembered that it was a stack of paper. So he opened it again and picked up the paper on top to read it under the moonlight. Loosely tied up in a precious bun. Light makeup done. Green smoke and jade-green fog cover light and graceful, fluttering and wandering. Meeting is like not meeting. How can excessive affection be like heartlessness? After the music and song, just waking up, deep in the courtyard under the moonlight, quiet. Poet Sima Guang? It was signed by Chu Qingyin. Higashio Motetsu felt that this poem was well written. But who was Sima Guang? Why hadn't he heard of this person? But these words were really not flattering. He thought of that little face on the tree that was a little depressed after being teased by him and couldn't help but chuckle. At this moment, the sound of footsteps approached. He restrained his expression and stuffed the poem into his sleeve. With a leap, he left the study. He flashed out of the courtyard and heard a clamor. They must have discovered the two shadow guards. Higashio Motetsu chuckled. He felt the pleasure of doing something bad. His figure flitted about in the mansion and soon left the mansion. Finally, he stood outside the wall, and the men in black had returned. The leader of the men in black stepped forward and said, reporting to young palace master, We have searched the King of England's residence and didn't find that thing. We suspect that this thing isn't in the King of England's residence." Higashio Motetsu lazily leaned against the tree. He tapped the folding fan in his palm and said softly, "Could it have been taken away by Xiao Su?" "We think it's very possible," the leader of the men in black responded. Higashio Motetsu sighed softly and pretended to be troubled. "This is really troublesome. What this young master hates the most is running around." All the men in black were speechless. But in order to get the thing back, this young master has to make a trip personally. "Young master, if you want to go sightseeing, just say so. We won't say anything. I heard that Xiao Su and the rest are going to mine. The little girl is also there. Tsk. It's so novel just thinking about it." Young master novel? He had a bad premonition. Let's go. Let's go mine together. They were already used to this kind of young master. Chapter 178. In the dead of night. Inside the Moon Palace, a figure stood under the palace lantern. Among the shadows, one could tell that it was a woman with a good figure. A gust of wind blew away the thin palace veil, revealing the face of the person inside. Imperial concubine Moon's face was calm and restless. She stood there for a while, as if she was waiting for someone. Suddenly, the candlelight flickered. Imperial concubine Moon couldn't help but close her eyes. When she opened them again, a black-clothed person had appeared in front of her. His entire body was covered by a cloak, making it impossible to see his appearance or figure. She could only feel that this person was very tall, but his entire body exuded a gloomy aura of death. But when Imperial concubine Moon looked over, the gloominess on his body faded a great deal. "Why did you order someone to summon me at this time? Is there something important?" The person's voice was low and slightly hoarse. She couldn't tell his age or gender. It seemed that he had changed his voice intentionally. As soon as Imperial concubine Moon saw who it was, she revealed a smile. "You came. I knew you would come." "Yes." The cloaked person nodded. "But you're too bold. The palace is heavily guarded. It's better to be careful." The cloaked person said, "With your martial arts, it's easy for you to enter the palace. Consort, you didn't care." Then, she went straight to the point. Xiao Su was sent to the Fully Mountain Range to investigate the mine. "What do you think about this?" "It's just a suicide mission," the cloaked person replied nonchalantly. "A suicide mission?" "Consort, you didn't understand. For so many years, the Fully Mountain Range has been covered in snow. It's close to the border of the Southern Kingdom. If there was a mine, it would have been excavated a long time ago. Why wait until now?" The cloaked person stood with his hands behind his back and analyzed for her. "What does your majesty mean?" Consort, you was a little confused. Since there was no mine, why would he send Xiao Su to search for it? Suddenly, her eyes lit up with surprise. "Could it be that your majesty wants to send Xiao Su away and use this period of time to nurture his forces and let him take root in the empire?" The cloaked man nodded slightly, not entirely. "Cultivating Ranner is one of the reasons, and making Xiao Su disappear from this world is another reason. However, I think that there is another reason, but we can't find it yet. However, I have to say that Sichuan Emperor really treats you and your mother very well. He spends all his time and energy on you. How do I make Xiao Su disappear?" Consort, you asked immediately. That was what she was most concerned about. Xiao Su was a thorn in her side. She had to get rid of him as soon as possible. "Do you know why the news of going to Fully Mountain Range to search for ores is known to everyone?" the cloaked man asked. "It can't be that your majesty sent someone to spread the news." Consort, you shook her head. "Although your majesty didn't like Xiao Su, he wouldn't be so vicious. Sichuan Emperor didn't give the order, but he knows that someone will do it. Those who are jealous of Xiao Su and those who are at odds with the Liang family will do it. This way, the whole world will know that there are ores in Fully Mountain Range. Then, those ambitious royals, those rich people who want to make huge profits, and those who don't care about their lives will all turn their attention to Fully Mountain Range. When that time comes, Fully Mountain Range will become a slaughterhouse." "But there are no ores there." Consort, you frowned and asked. "So what if there are no ores?" "Many people don't know the truth. They would rather believe that there are oars than not. They would rather kill 3,000 innocents than let one go. If there really are oars, they will take a share of it no matter what. Moreover, if they can't get it, they won't let others get it either. This is the psychology of human nature. The cloaked man sneered. Because he had changed his voice, he couldn't speak. It sounded very strange and gave people goosebumps. Consort Yu's eyes flashed with a sinister smile. It seems that I don't have to interfere. This matter has already spread like wildfire. Haha. It seems that Xiao Su won't be far from death this time, even if I don't do anything. But as soon as she finished speaking, Consort Yu frowned again. No, I'm still worried. As long as Xiao Su is alive, I won't be at peace. What do you want to do? The cloaked man raised his voice, as if he didn't agree. If you don't remove the roots when you cut the weeds, they will grow again when the spring breeze comes. I thought that he would die on the battlefield. I thought that I could kill him with assassination after assassination, but he escaped every time. This time, the opportunity is so good. I can't just let it go, so... Consort Yu looked at the cloaked man and said in a tone that brooked no argument, I want you to issue a kill order. Help me get rid of Xiao Su completely, so that I can rest easy. The cloaked man muttered, It's not that I can't issue a kill order, but do you really want to do it? He met Consort Yu's pleading eyes and finally sighed. Fine. I'll let you be stubborn for so many years. Consort Yu saw that he had compromised and couldn't help but feel happy. I knew you were the best to me. The cloaked man smiled bitterly and shook his head. The Sichuan emperor was the best to you. Even a vicious tiger wouldn't eat its own cubs, but he made an exception for you and your mother. With a wave of his cloak, he disappeared. Consort Yu looked at the wide, open window and laughed softly. Liang Yuan, this time, I want to see how you're going to fight with me. In the inner hall. Xiao was playing chess with himself, holding a white piece in one hand and a black piece in the other. Master, the King of England is already 7 miles away. A subordinate knelt in front of him and reported. Xiao placed a white piece, as if he didn't pay much attention to the subordinate's report. The heater was still burning, and the whole room was as warm as spring. The palace maids changed a new teacup. It was Bilyuakun tea. Xiao picked up the teacup and gently slid the lid over the floating tea leaves. His movements were slow and deliberate, and he was living a refined and luxurious life. It was hard for outsiders to imagine that the third prince, who was always weak and delicate, had a smile on his face, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was as if he was an unpredictable wild wolf lying in ambush, waiting for an opportunity to take a bite out of you. Master, everything is still calm at the moment. Should we make a move? The subordinate suggested. Xiao put down the teacup and took the brocade handkerchief from the palace maid. He wiped the corner of his mouth and said faintly, No need. It's not the right time yet. Moreover, there are many people who can't hold back. Why should we be the first to make a move? Yes, Master's consideration is more thorough than mine. The subordinate bowed his head and responded. Xiao continued to play chess. His eyes fell on the chessboard. His hand that was holding a piece paused slightly. After a moment of contemplation, he slowly said, However, I don't think this should be a simple trip to the mine. Father should have other instructions. You send someone to pay close attention to the King of England's every move and find out the secret mission. Yes, Master. The subordinate immediately accepted the order. Xiao placed the last piece, and the game was set. The white pieces completely outflanked the black pieces, and the black pieces were defeated. On a moonless and windy night, how many conspiracies were staged one by one? The night was too cold, and the wind was too cold. Could the people who were on a long journey have a safe and smooth journey? Chapter 179. The night had engulfed the entire land, except for one place that still had a warm light. Big Ice Cube, can I sleep with you tonight? She was a little hesitant and a little timid. Xiao Su subconsciously wanted to refuse, but when his gaze fell on the restless black figure, he couldn't look away. The wait was torturous. After waiting for a while, there was no response. Chu Qingyan was a little discouraged. Was Big Ice Cube sleeping soundly? Or was he trying to use silence to refuse her? Forget it. I'll just squeeze in with Sheening for a night. Just as she was about to turn and leave, she heard the sound of the tent opening. She lowered her head and met a pair of bottomless eyes. Come in. Her heart was filled with joy as she replied, okay. Then she quickly squeezed her way in. The tent wasn't big, just enough for one person to put down a blanket and pillow. It would be crowded with one more person, but luckily Chu Qingyan was petite and her figure was just right. It wouldn't make a difference whether she was there or not. After squeezing into the warm blanket, she couldn't help but sigh. The night in the mountains was really too cold. Just standing there for a while, she felt so cold that she couldn't stand it. The tent wasn't big, so Xiao Su could acutely feel the chill from her body. He reached out to pull her hands and covered them with his. He couldn't feel the warmth from her cold hands. He immediately frowned. It's such a cold day. Don't you know how to put on more clothes? Although she brought a blanket, it was obvious that it would be crowded if she put it in, so she put the blanket outside the tent and shared it with Big Ice Cube. Even though she had the body of a 10-year-old, she still had the mind of a 20-year-old. So she tried her best to keep a distance between them, but she didn't expect that when Big Ice Cube pulled her, her entire body would almost stick to him. Chu Qingyan's face heated up slightly, and she replied in a low voice, I forgot just now. She was only concerned with being afraid and couldn't care about anything else. Xiao Su heard this and remained silent. He just silently circulated his energy to disperse the chill from her body. The wind in the mountains was humid, and if it entered the body, it would damage the spirit. After a while, her whole body felt warm. Chu Qingyan couldn't help but reveal a satisfied smile. When Xiao Su saw her curled up in front of him like a kitten, he released his hand and asked coolly, Why did you suddenly want to sleep with this prince? You're already 10 years old, and you'll be of marriageable age in a few years. If you still sleep with others, people will laugh at you. Fortunately, Xiao Su rarely came into contact with women. His first thought was not that men and women should not be too close to each other. Instead, he felt that the little fellow was still too weak after years of fighting on the battlefield and going out to gain experience. How could he protect himself? When he grew up, Chu Qingyan blushed and whispered, I've slept in a tent before, but a snake sneaked in at night and bit me, so, back then, when she went to the wilderness to survive, it was because of this incident that she was left with a sequela. She didn't dare to sleep alone outside at night, especially in the wilderness. The past was unbearable to recall. I originally wanted to find Sheening, but I don't know why I couldn't help but walk over to you. If it's not convenient for you, I'll go out now. It seems like she still caused trouble for Big Ice Cube. He was such a delicate person since he was young, so he probably wasn't used to sharing a bed with others. Just as she was about to get up, a force suddenly came from her waist and pulled her into his embrace. She was caught off guard and bumped into his lean chest. Through the thin clothes, she seemed to be able to hear his strong heartbeat. Stop messing around. Could it be that you want to be exposed to the cold wind again? Xiao Su softly reprimanded her. He pressed her against him with one hand and lifted the blanket to her neck to prevent her from catching a cold. When Chu Qingyan came back to her senses, she was already nestled in his embrace. She was instantly moved. Although his tone was a bit bad, he still locked her in his embrace, not allowing her to be exposed to the cold wind. She felt an indescribable desire to rely on this person. Thank you, Big Ice Cube, she softly said. Perhaps she really did rely on this person, or perhaps she really did place this person in her heart as important as her parents. So when she was tossing and turning in the tent, the first person that flashed through her mind was him. Perhaps if she told her friends in university that she went to an adult man's place in the middle of the night to sleep with him, they would probably scold her to death. She didn't have any sense of safety at all, but she believed in Big Ice Cube's character. Moreover, Big Ice Cube really doted on her like she was his daughter. Although the age difference was a bit, that was why she was so thick-skinned as to take a picture of his tent. Now that she thought about it, it was a bit strange. How could she have the courage to make such a request? But when that warm and comforting chest held her, she felt that everything wasn't that important anymore. Big Ice Cube, I have a question I want to ask you. Before she went to sleep, she suddenly thought of something, but she was a bit hesitant when she asked. He replied a bit casually. When did you wake up last night? What I mean is you were clearly very drunk, so how could you have just woken up when Changyi went in? She had always wanted to ask this question because she wanted to know, when she wanted to pick up his mask, was he already sober? If he had already woken up, but allowed her to pick up his mask, did that mean he was willing to let her see his true appearance? If he hadn't woken up at the time, why would Cheng Yi's improper actions have been discovered? Nothing made sense. This king is very sensitive to smells. Xiao Su only replied with this one sentence before falling silent. Chu Qingyin's eyes were filled with confusion. Could it be that he had woken up because he smelled Huang Yi's scent? Then what about her? Could it be that Big Ice Cube had lost his sense of smell from her body? This question was so hard to solve. The person who revealed the answer was so stingy. She was in a daze as she thought about it, then fell asleep. Xiao Su listened to the even breathing of the person in his arms, and his lips slightly hooked. People who practice martial arts always had a thread in their minds that was stretched taut. If there was any movement around them, they would immediately wake up. This was self-defense, but they would also relax their vigilance towards the people around them who were close to them. And the little fellow, in these days of getting along with each other, had already made him accustomed to her existence. This was also the reason why she was able to get within 3 steps of him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so assured to give himself to the little fellow after getting drunk. There was no one in the King of England's palace who didn't know about their lord's taboos. As soon as everyone entered the palace, they were already informed that they were allowed to make mistakes, but they couldn't violate the lord's 4 prohibitions. They weren't allowed to enter the study at will. They weren't allowed to enter the room in the middle of the night. They weren't allowed to get within 3 steps of him. They weren't allowed to criticize in private. These 4 prohibitions were obeyed by everyone. It was just that these 2 people unknowingly got closer little by little. In the beginning, it had nothing to do with love, it had nothing to do with interests and strategies, and it had nothing to do with wealth and family background. It was pure as water. Chapter 180. When she woke up early in the morning, there was only her and a blanket left in the tent. Where was the big ice cube? She glanced around and finally sobered up and got up. The moment Chu Qingyin came out of the tent, she saw Xining holding a basin of water and waiting outside with her head lowered. Just as she was about to speak to Xining, she instantly felt everyone's gaze turn towards her. She raised her head in confusion and saw those people immediately looking elsewhere, pretending to be very busy. Chu Qingyin felt that these people were strange, but she had to wash up first. She turned to look at Xining and suddenly realized that Xining was also a little strange today. From the moment she came out of the tent, she had not said a single word. Xining? Chu Qingyin couldn't help but call out to her. Xining raised her head and looked at her smilingly with her round eyes. Master, are you going to wash up? Chu Qingyin raised her hand to rub her chin and looked at her suspiciously. Speak, what's going on? Why is it so strange when I come out? Xining laughed mischievously. Master, last night you... She raised her hand and pointed at the tent behind her master. Chu Qingyin followed her line of sight and suddenly understood. She raised her hand to slap her hand and said disapprovingly, Little girl, you're so young. Why are you thinking of such unhealthy things? She deliberately raised her voice to let the fire spirits who were listening attentively hear her. Xining asked doubtfully, Unhealthy? No, it's just that the fire spirit said this morning that Master is too timid, so she ran to Lord's tent. Chu Qingyin's face darkened. She felt that she had misunderstood. She looked around and saw everyone nodding at the same time. Little princess consort, you're too timid. Chu Qingyin was so angry that her head was on fire. So what if she was timid? Was it not allowed for people to have weaknesses? Master, you are even more timid than Xining. Xining will accompany you in the future. Xining said very seriously. Chu Qingyin felt as if an arrow had pierced her knee. She wanted to cry, but had no tears. Thank you for Xining. When they arrived at the dining area, the tables were also pieced together. Chu Qingyin sat down on a chair with a dejected look on her face. She had painstakingly built up her reputation when the ice cube was being wronged. Now it had fallen back to square one in one night. Yin lass, I heard that last night you... The Emperor Emeritus touched a sore spot. Chu Qingyin waved her hand weakly and said perfunctorily, I know. You also want to laugh at me for being a coward. Just laugh. The retired emperor laughed heartily at her words. Yin lass, I'm not talking about this. Then what do you want to say? It was rare that the retired emperor didn't laugh at her for being a coward. She couldn't help but feel refreshed. It seemed that the retired emperor wasn't the kind of person who would hit someone when they were down. She wouldn't bicker with him about the pastries from before. She saw the retired emperor approach her mysteriously and whisper into her ear, Is my grandson's tofu delicious? She was struck by lightning. Chu Qingyin felt as if she had been charred by lightning. Only now did she remember that there was someone here who was familiar with her background. How could she have forgotten? Imperial grandfather, you can eat whatever you want, but you can't speak whatever you want. We're innocent. Chu Qingyin argued with all her might. Don't worry, I understand. Warner and I also went through this in the past. Don't think that there's a generation gap between us just because we're separated by several generations. Imperial grandfather is very open-minded. The retired emperor patted her shoulder in a very righteous manner, almost knocking her lungs out. Imperial grandfather, what the hell do you know? Chu Qingyin felt that she would only make things worse, so she simply shut her mouth and didn't want to say anything else. But the retired emperor clearly didn't want to let her go. He half tempted and half threatened her. Yin lass, it's fine if you don't want me to say anything. When we reach a prosperous place, remember not to be stingy. Under the heavens, all lands belong to the emperor. On the shores of the earth, all are the emperor's subjects. Under the heavens, all lands belong to the emperor. So why do you keep thinking about my purse? Every sentence was about food. Chu Qingyin felt that this retired emperor was getting closer and closer to her father. The retired emperor had an I don't blame you if you don't understand expression. Don't you know what it means to see happiness on the other shore? Eating other people's things and using other people's things is much happier than spending your own money. Chu Qingyin blushed with shame. She really had to hand it to him. At this time, Xiao Su, Hualing, and the others just happened to slowly walk over. They could hear their conversation from afar. Master, if we enter the Zhejiang region from here, we only need to cross the Seven-Li Mountain and walk straight for 3 days. Hualing held a map and pointed at a place as he spoke. Xiao Su lowered his head to look at the map and ordered, no need to take a shortcut. Cross the Seven-Li Mountain and enter the first city. Hualing was a little confused. Master, if we enter the first city, we have to take this official road. Then it will take an extra day of travel. This doesn't seem right. Just follow the orders. Xiao Su lightly said, rejecting his subordinate's opinion. Hualing scratched his head. He felt that there was something wrong with his master this time, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Since his master wanted to take a detour, then they'll take a detour. His Majesty didn't insist that they rush to the Fu-Li mountain range anyways. Then, Master, do you have any other orders? Hualing asked. Who is managing the city we're entering? Xiao Su sat down on a chair. Huang Yi and the others had already served the dishes, arranged the bowls and chopsticks, and then retreated. Hualing seriously looked at the map, then replied, The prefect is Lu Ying. He manages the 3 prefectures and 7 counties. Pingyang City is the main city, and it's also the first city we're entering. This prince wants the information on his management of the 3 prefectures and 7 counties in recent years. Xiao Su said calmly. Hualing immediately agreed. Chu Qingyin, who was eating at the side, didn't understand. They could save time, so why did the big ice block want to take a detour? Could it be that he had other plans? Lu Ying, this name is so familiar. The Emperor Emeritus, who was eating in big mouthfuls, suddenly spoke. Xiao Su turned to look at him, and his tone seemed to carry a bit of a sigh. He's the 18th generation of the imperial family side branch. The Emperor Emeritus coughed lightly when he heard this. This prince hasn't been in charge for many years, so I don't remember clearly. Xiao Su said faintly, 2 years ago, when you passed by the district under Lu Ying's control, you even stayed in his residence for half a month. The Emperor Emeritus immediately buried his head in his food. As the saying goes, don't talk when eating. Chu Qingyin's head was full of black lines. The Emperor Emeritus was a classic example of forgetting after eating. After eating, we'll set off, Xiao ordered. Everyone accepted the order. In less than 2 hours, the information on the areas under Lu Ying's management in recent years was placed on Xiao's table. In the carriage, Xiao flipped through the stack of information that was half a person's height, page by page. Chu Qingyan noticed that his expression was getting darker and darker. She couldn't help but purse her lips. Why did the big ice block put aside his official business and investigate this Lu Ying first? Once they left the capital, she felt that the big ice block was acting strangely. Chapter 181. Chu Qingyan held her chin and thought back to the knowledge she had read in books before. At that time, her teacher had told them that the governor was the highest-ranking official in the country. Other than governing the people, promoting the virtuous, deciding the lawsuits, and investigating the traitors, he could also appoint and dismiss the scribes. That was equivalent to the current high-ranking officials and mayors. However, the ancient counties were much smaller than the modern ones, so there was no comparison at all. However, this position was already not small in the ancient times. At this time, a gust of wind blew in, and the paper on the little bed fell to her feet. She picked it up and inadvertently saw the words written on it. 3 years ago, Lu Ying's Qi County had a flood. The court had allocated 3 million taels of silver, but in the end, the citizens of Qi County only received 300,000 taels. The other 2,700,000 taels were a mystery. In the flood disaster, 172 people died, and 110 of them died from starvation. Chu Qingyan looked at the information written on the paper with wide eyes. No wonder Ice Blocku's face was so bad. With the several million taels of relief money being a mystery, there was a certain meaning to it. Corruption. In this world, there was no business that wasn't corrupt and no official that wasn't corrupt. This had already become the common saying of the citizens. Was that ice block going to take care of it? She silently put the paper back. She had never doubted the ice block's abilities, so she just needed to follow him. No matter what he did, she would support him. She originally had a bit of energy to look at the scenery outside the window, but as the carriage swayed, she began to feel drowsy. In the end, her body tilted and she fell asleep on the bed. Chu Qingyan had also redesigned the interior of the carriage. The concept of the small couch inside was the same as that of modern foldable sofas. Therefore, when she fell asleep sitting on the couch, Xiao, who had been paying attention to her, shook his head when he saw this. He carried her and flipped her over to the upper couch, joining it with the lower couch to form a small bed. Only then did he gently put her down. He silently stared at the sleeping face for a while. Perhaps from today onwards, it would be bumpy. There wouldn't be a soft bed to sleep on every time. Little fellow, are you ready? Are you ready to face the wind and rain with this king? The peacefully sleeping Chu Qingyan did not know that someone had been staring at her for a long time, not leaving their line of sight. Halfway through their journey, there was a sudden gust of wind and dark clouds covered the sky. Hualing looked at the dark sky and his heart sunk. There was no village or shop here. If there was a storm, there wouldn't be a place to hide from the rain. So the group of people rushed and arrived at the ferry port in the evening. The carriage stopped, and Chu Qingyan was already awake. There was only her, and she was the only person in the carriage. She wanted to get up, but when she saw the blanket was covering her body, she couldn't help revealing a smile. Who said the ice block was a cold person? Didn't he knew how to take care of time? She silently ridiculed those who slandered Big Ice Cube in her heart, then got out of the carriage. How to the internet was that time, in the end? It seemed like the words on Weibo were right. When the wind came, it was time to test everyone's weight. 80 kilograms would be blown away. 90 kilograms would be lifted off the ground. 110 kilograms would be wrapped around the pole, and 130 kilograms would not be able to stand on the road. Only the heavy weight could be as stable as Mount Tai. It was a good thing the wind was not as strong as a typhoon, otherwise she would already be floating in the sky. She opened her eyes from the wind and found that she was standing at a small ferry port. She could almost see the town on the other side, but looking at the splashes created by the wind, it would be very difficult to get through the night. Her hands formed a small tent in front of her. Looking around, she saw the ice blocks standing by the river, as well as the retired Emperor Hualing, Muling, Ethereal, and the others by his side. At this time, Xining walked over. "Master, you're awake. Lord just told this servant not to disturb you. And I've slept enough." "That's right. Are we going to cross the river tonight?" Chu Qingyin led Xining to the people in front of her as she asked. Xining replied, "Just now, I heard Lord Hualing's meaning. It seems like we want to stay here for the night and cross the river tomorrow." Chu Qingyin nodded. The sky was getting darker and the wind was getting stronger. Staying for the night before setting off was a wise decision. When they approached the group of people, they heard LVE say, "There is an inn 1 li away from here. We can stay there for the night." Xiao Su nodded, and Hualing began to order the others to get on their horses and prepare to find the inn. Chu Qingyin approached LVE and asked curiously, "LVE, you don't leave the house. How do you know there is an inn here?" LVE smiled faintly. "Little Gongzi, LVE's main responsibility is to memorize all the places in our Sichuan that we can stay in. Everyone has their own specialties. This servant is only doing her job well." Outside, everyone called Chu Qingyin Little Gongzi. Her identity was Xiao Su's younger cousin called Chu Yin. Of course, Chu Yin was given by Chu Qingyin herself. Originally, Xiao Su called her Xiao Yin, but when she said that, she immediately rejected it. Why did Xiao Yin sound like anti-inflammatory medicine? So she immediately changed her identity from blood brother to cousin. Chu Qingyin clicked her tongue. Sure enough, there was a saying that as long as you worked hard in one direction, you would become a great person sooner or later. LVE's powerful brain capacity and memory also made her admire her. The people around Big Ice Cube were all capable people, so the group of people headed towards the only inn within 100 miles. But when they arrived at the inn, a cold wind blew from behind them. In the dilapidated room, the first inn signboard had already lost 3 of its triangular nails. There was only 1 nail left that was unable to maintain the signboard. First inn? Xining struggled to see the words that were already covered in spiderwebs. Right now was not the time to care about this. The sky was already dark, and with the flashing of lightning, the rain would fall at any moment. So the group of people went in. When the people inside heard the commotion, they began to loudly shout, "Who is it? Who is it?" Chu Qingyin looked over when she heard this and saw a 30 to 40-year-old man with a body full of fat walk out. His nose was pointed to the sky, and from her angle, she could see that his chin was piled up to his neck. There was a thumb-thick gold necklace hanging from his short neck. He was simply a nouveau riche. Hualing resisted the urge to vomit and went forward to ask, "Are you the innkeeper? Our group wants to stay. Do you have any rooms?" Hearing that they were staying, the fat man immediately lowered his head and swept his eyes over the people present. When he saw the people in front, they were all dressed in luxurious clothes and looked like they came from rich families. His eyes immediately lit up and his attitude changed 180 degrees. Yes, yes, yes. No matter how many people come, there are enough rooms." At this time, another voice sounded out, "Damn ghost, what happened?" The fat man immediately turned his head and replied, "Woman, the big head is here." Once he said this, he realized that he had misspoken. The fat man immediately smiled and corrected himself. "Honored guests are here." Chu Qingyin's face turned dark. Chapter 182. At the corner of the staircase, a woman in her 30s walked out. She had an enchanting figure, but she looked very shrewd. When she saw Chu Qingyin and company, her eyes lit up. "So it's our esteemed guests. Please come in." When Chu Qingyin saw her face, she couldn't help looking away. That face was like a moving wall with a thick layer of powder on it. With each step, the powder fell off. "Damn ghost. Why aren't you greeting the guests yet?" The smart woman was very attentive to Chu Qingyin's group, but she turned around and shouted at the fat man. The fat man immediately called out, "Guests, come with me. I'll bring you to see the rooms." As soon as his voice fell, LVE stood up. "Shopkeeper, this servant will come with you to take a look." When the fat man saw LVE, His eyes lit up. Even a maidservant was this good-looking. He rubbed his hands together and led LVE up the stairs. Chu Qingyin was not assured. She looked at Hualing, and Hualing immediately sent a subordinate to follow them up. Hearing the creaking sounds coming up the stairs, Chu Qingyin's lips twitched. She was really worried that the entire staircase would collapse if she wasn't careful. Then guests. What do you want to eat tonight? The smart woman asked with a smile, as if she did not see the unnatural expressions on everyone's faces. What do you have? Chu Qingyin stood up and asked. The smart woman saw Chu Qingyin dressed in men's clothes, looking delicate and cute. Her eyes lit up, and she immediately replied, Our store has steamed chicken with winter melon, braised pig trotters with southern milk, pumpkin and pork ribs with black bean sauce, black fish and chicken stew, potato roasted tendon, tofu pudding with fat intestines, soy pork shoulder. The smart woman listed a series of dishes. When everyone heard this, they were all a bit hungry after traveling for 2 days. Chu Qingyin heard this and thought for a bit before saying, No need, my family has a chef. We just need to borrow the kitchen. Stinky brat, Grandpa, I want to eat. The saliva that had flowed out of the retired emperor's mouth instantly disappeared. Just as he was about to resist, he saw Chu Qingyin looking at him with a beaming smile. He immediately shut his mouth. Grandpa, the doctor has already said that you're not allowed to eat greasy food, meat, or fish these few days. Have you forgotten? Hearing this, retired emperor rubbed his nose. This girl's eyesight was too sharp. When Hualing and the others saw the retired emperor being suppressed by their little princess, they couldn't help but laugh. The shrewd woman did not have much to object to. She only said that the kitchen was messy and needed to be tidied up. Then, she went into the kitchen to inform the chef. After a while, she came out again and allowed Chu Qingyin to instruct her people to bring her ingredients into the kitchen. At this time, Qingyi and Xining had already wiped the greasy table and chairs with cloth towels and let the 3 masters sit down. When the shrewd woman saw that the other party was using her own tea set, she did not get angry. Instead, she stood at the side and observed Chu Qingyin's group. Her eyes darted around, and no one knew what she was thinking. When Ethereal saw this, she couldn't help but say, Innkeeper, we don't need people here. You can leave. Good. You guys have a good chat. The shrewd woman responded politely before turning to walk towards the kitchen. When they were the only ones left on the first floor, Hualing looked around warily. Master, this subordinate feels that this inn is a bit strange. It can't be described as strange. Mu Ling agreed. Strengthen the guard tonight. Xiao Su swept a look at the shabby inn and said to Hualing yes. Hualing responded and gathered the guards to deploy the guards for the night. The Biluakan tea was brewed, and Chu Qingyin poured tea for the 2 of them. She sighed and said, If it weren't for the fact that there was no other inn within 100-li radius, I wouldn't enter this, and even if you beat me to death. Sticky brat, you're really timid. Thinking back to when I was roaming the north and south, the Emperor Emeritus began to ramble on and on about his heroic deeds in the past. It was an endless stream. Although the Emperor Emeritus had been calling her stinky brat ever since she changed her appearance, ignoring the way he addressed her, the Emperor Emeritus's stories were quite immersive. Adding on his dancing body language, it was even more fascinating. When the Emperor Emeritus's mouth was dry and he stopped to drink water, Xiao Su slowly said, Who helped you with the trouble you caused back then? The Emperor Emeritus choked on the tea that he had just drunk. His face was full of guilt. But when he saw Chu Qingyin waiting for him to continue, he immediately said, There's a junior here. Don't always undermine me. Be careful of people saying that you're hard to get along with. Xiao Su drank his tea and ignored him. Seeing that the big ice cube didn't reveal anything, Chu Qingyin immediately turned to ask, Grandfather, who helped you deal with it? What trouble did you cause? Cough, cough, the past is unbearable to recall. Let everything go with the wind. The Emperor Emeritus drank tea to cover it up. Chu Qingyin pursed her lips in disbelief. It didn't matter. Paper couldn't wrap fire. She would know one day. At this time, LVE, who had finished checking the room, walked down the stairs and reported to her lord, Master, the room upstairs is quite clean. You can stay there. The moment LVE finished speaking, the fat man immediately boasted, "Our family's inn is the best in within 100 li radius." As soon as he said that, the fat man's gaze met with Xiao Su's, and he suddenly shivered. He instantly forgot what he wanted to say and immediately found an excuse to slip away. After a while, Huang Yi had already walked up with the dishes. It was a simple vegetarian dish, but it looked, smelled, and tasted good, causing everyone's stomachs to rumble. Xiao Su waved his hand, and everyone sat down and started eating. Chu Qingyin didn't have much of an appetite, so she asked Huang Yi, "Did everything go well in the kitchen just now?" When Huang Yi heard that, her eyes couldn't help but reveal a trace of disgust. The kitchen can be said to be dirty and messy. Everywhere is greasy, but the only pleasing thing is that the knives in their kitchen are very sharp and the chopping board is very big. But this servant isn't used to their things, so I used all the things I brought from the Fu. Chu Qingyin nodded and fell into deep thought while holding her chopsticks. As soon as she entered this inn, she felt that everything was strange. There was a fat boss, a shrewd lady boss, and a scarred chef. There was no one else in the entire inn. Her eyelids kept twitching, as if something would happen tonight. At this time, a deafening clap of thunder exploded in the sky. The dusky inn turned bright in an instant, but a moment later, it fell into darkness again with the lingering sound of the thunder god. Everyone had a lingering fear. When the Emperor Emeritus saw her in a daze, he couldn't help but divert his attention from the delicious food to her. "I say, stinky brat, why aren't you eating? Don't cry that you're hungry at night." "I don't seem to be the one saying that I'm hungry in the middle of the night." Chu Qingyin returned to her senses and joked with a smile. When the Emperor Emeritus heard that, he muttered, "You really don't know how to appreciate good intentions." Chu Qingyin helplessly shook her head, but with the Emperor Emeritus's jesting, her mood improved a lot. Just as she was about to eat, a pair of chopsticks fell in front of her, and a fried egg appeared in her bowl. "Don't talk too much, hurry up and eat." Immediately after, Xiao Su's voice came from her side. Chu Qingyin turned to look at the person beside her. He was calmly eating his meal. His actions were elegant, and his nobility wasn't affected in the slightest by the environment. She nodded and buried her head in eating. When she heard the Emperor Emeritus grumble that he picked up food for her and didn't pick up food for the elders, she couldn't help but laugh. Perhaps the journey would be filled with inconceivable challenges, but at this moment, in this desolate and strange inn, she felt a moment of peace. Chapter 183. After the meal, that shrewd woman wanted to help clean up, but Huang Yi tactfully declined. She wasn't annoyed and continued to smile. However, Chu Qingyin felt that it was better for her not to smile than to smile. Who knew how much of the powder on her face fell as her facial muscles trembled? Thunder rumbled, each louder than the last, as if it was going to tear the entire world apart. The dark clouds in the sky were about to merge with the distant mountain peak. It was obvious that a storm was coming tonight. At this moment, the shrewd woman held a lantern and said to everyone, "Everyone, rest early. I'll lead you upstairs." As she said that, she led the way. Chu Qingyin stepped on the wooden ladder and heard creaking sounds. She was a little embarrassed and quickened her pace to go upstairs. Qingyi had already arranged the rooms for everyone. The retired emperor stretched lazily and couldn't wait to enter his own room. Chu Qingyin turned around and was about to say good night to Xiao Su when she heard him say to Xining, "Move your master's quilt and pillow to my room." When he said that, not only Xining, but Chu Qingyin was also stunned. "Oh, okay." Xining responded somewhat incoherently. Chu Qingyin couldn't believe that the person in front of her would say that, and immediately confirmed, "Big ice cube, am I sleeping with you tonight?" Xiao Su didn't feel that there was anything wrong. In any case, they had already slept together on the same bed last night. 1 or 2 more nights wouldn't make any difference to him. Thus, in the end, Chu Qingyin didn't even know how she floated into his room. After entering the door, Chu Qingyin looked around the room. The direction was indeed, as LVE said, quite clean. Chu Qingyin touched the table and then walked to the windowsill. At this time, the wind was strong and the trees outside were already blown to the side. The cold wind poured in, so she quickly closed the window tightly. Xining came in with the quilt. After laying it out, she left. Sleep early tonight. If the rain stops tomorrow, we still have to continue our journey, Xiao Su said to her lightly. Chu Qingyin looked over and saw that he was about to take off his clothes to rest. She naturally walked over, took his belt, and took his coat to the side of the wardrobe to hang them up. Perhaps it was because the two of them had interacted like this before in the Wang Fu, so at this moment, they did not feel that there was anything wrong. When the two of them took off their outer clothes, they were already on the bed and covered with a blanket. The late autumn night was very cold. Although it was not as bone-piercing as the winter night, it still made people shiver. Chu Qingyin pulled the blanket up to her chin, and her eyes darted around. The bed curtain above her head was dark black, and at a glance, it looked like a bottomless pit. Her thoughts immediately scattered. Xiao Su saw her slightly dazed expression from the corner of his eyes and couldn't help but reach out to cover her eyes. Sleep, don't let your thoughts run wild. From the moment they entered the inn, he had already felt a faint uneasiness from her body. It was obvious that she was not experienced enough, and her willpower was not enough. His heart had a grudge against this inn, so he was not at ease leaving her alone in the room. He felt that he would only be at ease if she was under his watch, so he brought her into his room without any hesitation. Chu Qingyin felt that slightly warm hand leave her eyelid and couldn't help but open one eye. She said to the person beside her in an aggrieved voice, I really want to sleep quickly, but I slept too long during the day. Right now, I don't feel sleepy at all. At this moment, the two of them each had a blanket. Chu Qingyin felt a little cold, so she buried her chin in the blanket. Last night's sleep was still more comfortable. The large ice cube was like a heater, and her entire body was warm. As if sensing her small movements, Xiao Su pulled open his own blanket. Come in. Chu Qingyin was overjoyed. She pulled open her own blanket and rolled into his blanket, only stopping when she touched his chest. The long-awaited warmth enveloped her body, making Chu Qingyin feel so comfortable that she smiled contentedly. Xiao Su saw her satisfied face and couldn't help but feel a little helpless in his heart. She really was a kitten that was easily satisfied. However, those who were content with what they had were more likely to feel happy. After being warmed up, she began to feel restless. Chu Qingyin turned over and laid on the pillow. She asked with a curious face, Big Ice Cube, do you wear a mask when you sleep? Since leaving the capital, the large ice cube had been wearing a gauze hat. She knew that this was to hide his identity. Now that he was sleeping with a mask, it seemed that no matter when, he had never shown his true face to others. And Xiao Su replied with his eyes closed. Big Ice Cube, are the burns on my face really that serious? She hesitated for a moment before asking the question that had been in her heart. But after waiting for a while with her eyebrows lowered, the large ice cube didn't answer. She raised her head and saw that his eyes were closed, as if he had fallen asleep. She couldn't help but give up on this question. Forget it, the large ice cube was probably used to wearing it. Why should she worry about this question? Thus, she silently counted more than 200 dumplings in her heart before falling asleep in a daze. He didn't know when, but the person beside him had rubbed against his shoulder, completely using his shoulder as a pillow. Xiao Su turned his head and lowered his eyebrows. What entered his eyes was a head of fine black hair that was as smooth as silk and as black as ink jade. A gentle light flashed in his eyes. The time isn't right yet. You will see it eventually. After whispering, his long arms pulled her into his embrace. Then he closed his eyes, 30% alert, 70% sleep. The heavy rain that had been brewing for an entire afternoon and night finally poured down. Thunder and lightning rumbled. The bean-sized raindrops hit the roof one by one, pitter-patter. In the whole world, other than the wind and lightning and the majestic rain, no other sound could be heard. And the small world in his arms had already become her warm harbor. There was no storm, no wind, and no lightning. I hope that I can protect you, safe and happy. In the kitchen, a few figures sneakily gathered in a circle, conspiring. This time there are a few big fishes. Judging by their clothes and expenses, they are obviously from rich families. Looks like we're going to strike it rich tonight, the fat man said greedily. The scarred chef nodded, but he had some misgivings. These people have servants with them. It looks like they're all martial artists. There are a lot of people walking. It's not easy to deal with them. The shrewd woman sneered. What are you afraid of? It's still the same as last time. They will all be taken down. Won't they still let us do whatever we want? Wife is right. The fat man nodded repeatedly. But I keep feeling that the man with the gauze hat is a little scary. The scarred chef said, Don't be afraid. We have already done so many jobs. What kind of difficult master have we not met? It's settled then. We will act at 3 o'clock. The shrewd woman made the final decision. The other two looked at each other, and they had no objections. In the dark night, the violent wind and rain ravaged the earth. Dozens of horses galloped in the rain. On the backs of the horses were men in black. They carried bows and arrows on their backs, and long swords at their waists. They urged the black horses to step through the rain and head towards the ferry. Their voices were covered by the angry roars of the heavens and the earth. The black shadows blended into the darkness. If no one looked carefully, they would not be able to discover these black-clothed men with thick killing intent. Chapter 184. Late at night, it was raining heavily. The astute woman was holding a large bowl of soup as she walked into the hall on the first floor. Hualing was patrolling downstairs with people. Seeing the astute woman walking in, he immediately said, Shop owner, why aren't you resting this late? The astute woman angrily said, For us who do business, how can we rest? Serving you is our duty. The astute woman said this as she walked to the square table. She put down the bowl and said to Hualing and the others, It's raining so heavily and the weather is cold. Come, drink some soup to warm up your bodies. Hualing righteously refused when he heard this. No need. Many thanks for shop owner's good intentions, but we still need to guard. The astute woman paused before continuing to persuade them. Drinking a bowl of soup won't delay your work. Moreover, your bodies will be warm after drinking it. So wouldn't you have more energy to resist the cold wind at night? Hualing waved his hand and turned to patrol. Seeing that Hualing was not moved and the servants under him were still standing guard, the astute woman deliberately used her hand to spread the fragrance in the bowl. Even if the fragrance spread, no one would bat an eye. The astute woman cursed in her heart this group of stubborn people, so she carried the bowl of soup back down. The two people in the kitchen saw her return without any success and were a bit worried. What do we do? These people are stubborn. It is indeed hard to trick them, but it doesn't matter. Looking at the sky, this rain won't last until tomorrow. Just relax and wait. With this delay, they had missed the best time. The astute woman fiercely said this. On whatever wife says, the fat man said with a smile. Because he was too fat, his eyes disappeared when he smiled. The scarred chef nodded. Anyway, these people can't leave, so we'll think of a way tomorrow. Moreover, when I wandered around the horse stables, I found that there were quite a few good things in their carriages. If we can take down these people, we can earn a large amount. Last time, those people looked decent, but they didn't even have a few dozen tails in their luggage. They really suffered a large loss, the fat man said with disdain. So this time, we have to be careful. There are quite a few people, so it's best to be careful, the astute woman said in a small voice. The two of them nodded when they heard this. He had a dreamless night. When Chu Qingyan woke up, she found that the sky was still dark, and she could faintly hear that the wind was still howling outside. She wondered, could it be that she woke up too early and the sky was still dark? But when he turned around, the bed beside him was already empty. Clearly, Big Ice Cube had woken up. Chu Qingyan rubbed her eyes and got up. Xining, who was outside, heard the noise inside and came in with water. Master, did you sleep well last night? Xining came in and asked with a smile. Chu Qingyan nodded. Pretty good. Is it still raining outside? Xining wrung the cloth dry and handed it to her. Yes, the wind is very strong. Although the rain has stopped, Lord Hualing said that there might be a storm today. Perhaps we will have to stay here for another day. Chu Qingyin took the cloth and wiped her face and hands. She said somewhat worriedly, "This is the only way. This weather is not suitable for crossing the river. Otherwise, the consequences will be unpredictable." After washing up, Chu Qingyin walked out of the room feeling refreshed. She stepped on the creaking ladder and went downstairs. Xiao Su and the rest were already seated downstairs, drinking tea. The moment Chu Qingyin sat down, she saw a retired emperor winking at her. Her mouth twitched. "Grandfather, you didn't sleep well last night. Even your eyes are crooked?" Retired emperor immediately restrained his expression and glared at her in annoyance. "You're the one who slept crooked." Chu Qingyin was instantly in a good mood. Bickering with retired emperor was the most interesting thing. Thus, Chu Qingyin happily enjoyed her breakfast. "Let's stay here for another day and see how the weather is tomorrow before making any plans," Xiao Su said lightly. Chu Qingyin nodded. "No objections." At this time, the guard who went out against the wind came back. He cupped his hands towards his master and said, "The water level of the river is rising. If it doesn't recede tomorrow, it will be difficult for the boat to move forward." When Chu Qingyin heard this, she frowned. Could it be that they still couldn't move tomorrow? Keep an eye on the water level," Xiao Su ordered. The moment he finished speaking, the heavy rain fell again with pitter-patter. The troops rested. Ethereal studied the medical book in the room. Mu Ling was also fiddling. Qing, he went to the stable to feed the horses. Lve went upstairs to tidy up the room. At this time, only Chu Qingyin, Xiao Su, retired emperor, Xining, Gu Rong, Gu Yi, and the others were left in the main hall. Hualing came back after strengthening the guards. When he saw the young princess counting the water droplets in boredom, he couldn't help but ask, "Little Gongzi, why don't you take this opportunity to practice the horse stance and practice martial arts?" When Chu Qingyin heard this, she was startled. Then she saw Big Ice Cube look over. She suddenly felt sweat on her head. I think that it's good to have Qinggong. If something happens, it'll be fine." Chu Qingyin rubbed her nose and said with a laugh. She didn't know if it was because she left the capital, but her desire to practice martial arts wasn't as strong. She subconsciously felt that the capital was the most dangerous place. Without powerful abilities, she couldn't protect herself. But now, she had changed her mind. If she only had martial arts and no intelligence, it would be difficult to protect herself. So she didn't have such a strong pursuit of martial arts. However, in short, she was lazy. The scenery outside was too beautiful. She was far away from the disputes in the capital. Her entire person was relaxed, and her sense of danger wasn't as obvious. When retired emperor heard this, he said with some disappointment, "Don't regret it when it's time to use it." Chu Qingyin lightly coughed and didn't respond. Only, she felt Big Ice Cube's gaze on her. Thinking about it, she said, "Cousin, I think I could be your support and help you take care of everything behind you. That way, you won't have to worry about anything behind you. How about it? You could do your own things, and I'll protect your back. All the trivial matters won't bother you." Xiao Su originally wanted to use this opportunity to let her grow bit by bit. At least, she wouldn't need to rely on others. But in these 2 days, when she slept peacefully in his arms at night, those thoughts slowly dissipated. Forget it, he'll protect her. Actually, she had already done very well. From the time Xiao Ran was attacked until now, everything she did had exceeded his expectations. She faced difficulties head-on and never backed down. Even when going out, she considered everything. Why did he need to ask her to be omnipotent? That was enough. Chu Qingyin was relieved to be able to obtain Big Ice Cube's understanding. Although it wasn't a burden to have more skills, she wasn't interested in practicing martial arts. Moreover, she believed that with Big Ice Cube around, even if she was in danger, she would be safe in the end. However, not long after, Chu Qingyin would recall what she thought and said today. She hated herself immensely. Why did she refuse to practice martial arts in the first place? That omnipotent person who was so strong that no one could threaten him would one day be powerless. The heavy rain washed away many things, revealing its original appearance. But it also drowned many things, hiding it. Chapter 185. The rain continued to fall, and dark clouds covered the city, indicating that today's rain would not stop so soon. Looking outside, other than a curtain of rain, nothing could be seen. If she didn't know the time, she would have thought that it was still late at night. In the shabby inn, there were a few broken lanterns hanging. When the wind blew in, the flames would be blown askew from time to time. If she wasn't in the middle of it, she would have thought that this was the set of a horror movie. Apart from them, there were no other guests in the entire inn. Fortunately, there were many of them, otherwise it would have been very deserted. Chu Qingyan sighed softly, feeling that doing nothing was very boring. Meanwhile, the retired emperor didn't stop eating the pastries at all. He was very satisfied and relishing in the taste. Chu Qingyan really didn't understand why the retired emperor, who had always been accustomed to all kinds of delicacies in the world, would have a special liking for her pastries. Xiao Su, who was sipping tea at the side, looked at the pouring rain outside. His eyes were still indifferent, as if this heavy rain didn't affect him at all. Suddenly his sleeve was tugged. He turned his head and looked at the person beside him, asking with his eyes, "Big Ice Cube, has the retired emperor always liked to eat desserts?" She really couldn't answer this question after much thought. When Xiao Su heard this, he looked up at his imperial grandfather, who was eating happily, and a trace of indescribable emotion welled up in his eyes. Grandfather didn't like desserts, but grandmother liked to eat them and also liked to make them. After grandmother passed away, grandfather started to try eating pastries. So that's how it is. Chu Qingyan nodded. At this time, Xiao Su faintly added, "The pastries you make have grandmother's taste." Chu Qingyan was startled. She bit her lip and looked at the retired emperor, who was holding a pastry in one hand and a teacup in the other. His expression was so satisfied that it was as if he was enjoying the most beautiful thing in the world, but those were clearly the most ordinary pastries. The previous Sichuan emperors had always passed the throne to the next successor before the death of the previous emperor. Only the previous emperor had abdicated the throne to the crown prince when he was in the age of knowing destiny. The current Sichuan emperor was Emperor Sichuan. She remembered the rumors she had heard in Jingdou. The previous empress had passed away from a serious illness. The retired emperor, who was immersed in state affairs, was inconsolable. After dealing with the funeral of his beloved empress, not even a month had passed before he passed the throne to the Sichuan emperor and left the world in grief. You won't know how strong the wine is until you are drunk. You won't know how deep the wine is until you have loved. Only when you lose something would you know how to cherish it. Chu Qingyan's eyes reddened slightly. That was why the retired emperor left the place where he was heartbroken and roamed the world as his home. Therefore, because her pastries had the shadow of imperial grandmother, she followed her all the way and used all kinds of methods to trick those pastries into her hands. Then, should she prepare more pastries for imperial grandfather to eat in the future? Seeing the little fellow's red eyes, Xiao Su couldn't help but say, "You don't need to go out of your way to satisfy grandfather. Just pretend you don't know anything." Chu Qingyan was moved. Living in one's own world and fantasizing that the food in one's hands was made by one's lover, one's heart would be filled with happiness. But grandfather is very pitiful. Chu Qingyan sighed softly. You didn't cherish it back then, and now you regret it. This is what it means to reap what you sow. Xiao Su's eyes were filled with complex emotions. However, when he spoke to the little fellow, his tone was still indifferent, as if he didn't have any feelings. Chu Qingyan looked at the retired emperor, who was amused by himself, and shook her head. Then she would pretend she didn't know anything. Perhaps this was the only way she could help the retired emperor, who lived in the past. A person who lived in the past was still happy. If the pillar of support that they relied on to survive was broken, they would probably lose hope in life and live in fear, unease, and regret all day long, burying oneself in state affairs and neglecting the love of one's life, to the point of endless regret in the end. This kind of emperor was a wise ruler in the eyes of the common people, but in the eyes of his wife, he was an unqualified lover. Big Ice Cube, I'll go play 5 in a row with grandfather. Chu Qingyan picked up the chessboard and quickly walked towards the retired emperor. When the retired emperor saw her rushing over, he immediately protected the pastries in front of him. "Stinking brat, what are you trying to do? Let me tell you, I won't give you these pastries." If it was in the past, she would definitely say that she didn't care at all. However, now that she knew the truth, she no longer cared about these things with him. Instead, she felt that this kind of retired emperor was so cute that it made one's heart ache. After taking off his dragon robe, he could finally live for himself, but there was no one by his side to laugh and curse. "Grandfather, don't worry, I won't think about your pastries. Come, let's play chess." Chu Qingyan opened the door, and Xining immediately placed 2 black and white chess boxes. The retired emperor suspiciously looked her up and down. "You know how to play chess?" "I don't." She had never touched chess before. "Then you still want to play with me?" The retired emperor rolled his eyes at her. "We're not playing chess." "Then do you want to play marbles with me?" The retired emperor bluntly laughed. "Retired emperor, you've really had enough. Let's compete in 5 in a row." Chu Qingyan finished speaking and explained the rules under his puzzled gaze. Who knew that just as she finished speaking, the retired emperor burst out laughing. "Stinking brat, you'll be beaten very miserably by me." Chu Qingyan felt that she was being looked down upon. In any case, she had competed in modern times, all right? Whether it's a mule or a horse, won't you know once you take it out for a walk? All right, since you're bent on losing, I'll fulfill your wish. Come, I'm old, and as the saying goes, respect the old and cherish the young. Then I won't be polite. I'll take the white chess piece first. The retired emperor took the chess box and took the lead to place a chess piece. Chu Qingyan's mouth twitched. The retired emperor was simply displaying his thick skin to the extreme. However, the other party had already placed a chess piece, so she also began to seriously play chess. Xiao Su's gaze withdrew from the wind and rain outside and landed on the noisy little world beside him. The little fellow was racking his brains while Imperial Grandfather was drinking tea and singing a little tune, constantly mocking him. The rumbling sound of the thunderstorm gradually faded away, leaving only the sound of these two people's incessant bickering. Xiao Su felt that at this moment, his heart was incomparably peaceful. "I've won again. Stinking brat, you owe me another plate of snow jade jelly." Ha! In the entire inn, other than the sound of the rain, there was only the retired emperor's triumphant cheers. The servants who didn't have any tasks were also attracted by this lively scene and surrounded the table. This was the so-called true gentleman who didn't speak while watching chess, but the chatter on the side was like a market. "Little young master, if you make this move, that place will be taken by old master first. Little young master, you made a mistake there. This is bad, it's been taken." Huo Ling, Mu Ling, and the others were all jumping around on the side. Chu Qingyan wanted to cry, but no tears came out. She was the one who was jumping around. "All right, may I ask if you are the reinforcements that the monkey invited? All of you, report to this lady." Chapter 186. I lost again. Chu Qingyan felt that she had never lost so miserably before. TSK, the 30th plate of pastries. "Stinky brat, let's make a deal. I don't want the same thing. Otherwise, it doesn't count." Emperor Emeritus stroked his beard and said proudly. He was the happiest when he saw Yin last being defeated. Ha! Chu Qingyan cleaned up the chessboard again, while crying in her heart. She just wanted to make Imperial Grandfather happy out of kindness. How did she lose herself all of a sudden? This Imperial Grandfather was too disrespectful. Forget it. She had to finish walking the path she chose even if she had to kneel. Just as Chu Qingyan finished putting away the chess pieces, a tall shadow suddenly covered her side. She looked up and saw the big ice cube standing beside her, reaching out a finger and lightly pointing at her position. If she guessed correctly, the big ice cube wanted to play chess with Imperial Grandfather. Thus, she immediately abdicated. Xiao Su sat down and casually said to Emperor Emeritus, "Respect the old and love the young. You go first." Emperor Emeritus said with a faint smile, It's rare that you're willing to play chess with me. I have nothing to do." Xiao Su pushed the chess box in front of him and said indifferently. Emperor Emeritus chuckled. "Isn't it because your child lost so miserably that you can't bear to see it?" Imperial Grandfather was half right. The defeat that appeared on the little fellow's face just now really made him feel that it was a bit dazzling. The other half was that the little fellow was undisciplined by nature. If she was asked to make a few plates of pastries, it would probably depend on her mood. She lost so thoroughly this time. He was afraid that she would develop a fear of pastries in the future. It was rare for her to have the mood to fiddle with something. If this interest was erased, she would probably never touch these pastries again. His veil covered his face, so no one knew what he was thinking at this time. Since Imperial Grandfather wants to love the young, then grandson won't be polite. Xiao Su picked up a black chess piece between his middle and index fingers. Ignoring Imperial Grandfather's long-winded words, he placed the black chess piece first. The retired emperor didn't expect that he would strike first to gain the initiative. He muttered that he wasn't filial at all, and then the white chess piece followed. Chu Qingyan felt that sometimes the way Big Ice Cube got along with the retired emperor was like a family. It was completely different from the way he got along with the Sichuan emperor. Her gaze landed on that pair of slender hands. The black chess pieces were glossy, contrasting with the fair skin of his fingertips. The joints of his fingers were distinct. It was hard to imagine that such a pair of hands could simultaneously wield a sword on the battlefield and play chess. It was the most elegant pair of hands she had ever seen. It was even more beautiful and powerful than a woman's hand. Chu Qingyan came back to her senses when she heard a cheer beside her. She saw that the situation was one-sided. The white pieces covered the chessboard, but all the paths were blocked by the black pieces. There were very few opportunities to form a line. The retired emperor was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. In the end, he could only spread out his hands and admit defeat. Again, Xiao Su took back the chess piece and didn't give the retired emperor any time to react before saying directly. The retired emperor, who was about to leave his seat and slip away, could only sit down and continue to fight. Thus, for the entire afternoon, the hall was filled with one sentence after another. Again, in everyone's eyes, the retired emperor was sweating more and more. In the end, Xiao Su won 25 plates of pastries for Chu Qingyan, so he still lost 5 plates. At this time, Xiao Su put the chess piece back into the box and didn't make another move. That's all for today. The retired emperor let out a sigh of relief. He was finally let off. The onlooker sees more clearly than the person involved. Chu Qingyan's heart was slightly moved. Big Ice Cube not only helped her relieve the pressure of those 30 plates of pastries, but he also didn't cause Imperial Grandfather to suffer heavy losses. At the very least, he won 5 plates of pastries. Both sides took care of each other appropriately. It had to be said that if Big Ice Cube was in the modern world, he would definitely be a good son in the eyes of his parents and a good husband in the eyes of his wife. The conflict between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law wouldn't exist at all. Although he lost in the end without any dignity, at least he didn't lose terribly. The retired emperor winked at Chu Qingyan. "Don't forget, there are still 5 plates." Chu Qingyan couldn't help but laugh. He was still thinking about it at this time. This was a real foodie. 5 plates were nothing. She nodded straightforwardly. Xiao Su took back the chess piece and went upstairs. The retired emperor also rubbed his stomach and went upstairs after eating, drinking, and playing to his heart's content. Chu Qingyan felt that it was quite boring to play alone, so she gave the chessboard to Turin and Ethereal to play by themselves. She also went upstairs. While Chu Qingyan and the others were having fun in the main hall, the 3 shrewd women in the kitchen were secretly plotting. "Tonight, I will put the knockout drug in the water jar. As long as their maidservants cook, they will use the water. When the time comes, the scarred chef couldn't help but laugh sinisterly. "All right, let's do that. When the time comes, let me play with that delicate young master for 2 days before sending him to the brothel. His appearance will definitely be liked by many officials and nobles. When the time comes, we can sell him for a good price." The shrewd woman's eyes flashed with a faint light, which made her white and thick face even more terrifying. Then I want that maidservant in green clothes. She looks like water spirit. The fat man's saliva was about to flow out. All right, all right, all right. I'll give you the green girl, and give that green girl to him. The shrewd woman pointed at the scarred chef. These people hadn't succeeded yet, but they were already thinking about how to divide the spoils. The dark kitchen emitted a rancid smell. At this time, the men in black clothes who were sticking close to the outer wall of the kitchen heard the secret plot from inside. They curled their lips and revealed a cold smile. Their fingers curled slightly, and the dozens of men in black clothes behind them nodded and flipped through the window. The shrewd woman and the others only felt the candlelight flicker. When they opened their eyes, they saw that there seemed to be something flashing under their necks. They suddenly woke up with a start. Weren't the things under their necks just large knives? Trembling, they turned their heads to look and saw more than 10 men in black clothes standing in front of them with swords drawn. Gloominess and death instantly filled their surroundings. The three were so frightened that their bodies went soft, and they knelt on the ground one after another. "Heroes, please spare our lives. Heroes, please spare our lives. We're just doing a small business. If you want money, you can go and find the guests of my inn. They come from rich families and are much richer than us commoners." The shrewd woman immediately turned her head and directed their gazes to the people in the main hall. "We don't want money." A man in black clothes slowly walked out. He looked at the three people coldly and said in a low voice, Then what do you want? No matter what you want, as long as we have it, we will give it to you immediately." The fat man was so scared that he couldn't even speak clearly. "We don't want anything. We only want you to cooperate with us to do one thing, and we will spare your lives." The leader of the men in black clothes said coldly, "All right, no matter if it's climbing a mountain of knives or falling into a pot of boiling oil, we will follow your orders. You are still in the business of killing people and robbing people." The leader of the men in black mocked. He turned around and raised his hand to signal his subordinates to put away their weapons. He said coldly, "You just have to listen to my orders at night." Chapter 187. Dinner was prepared by Huang Yi as usual. In the kitchen, Huang Yi was carefully cutting vegetables with a knife in her hand. At this time, the scarred chef came in with a pot of green vegetable leaves. "Miss, these vegetables are very fresh. Do you want me to make a dish for your master?" Huang Yi turned her head and saw that the vegetables were indeed very fresh. There were water droplets on the leaves, and there was some soil at the roots. It seemed that these vegetables were just picked from the fields. The scarred chef saw her gaze fall on the vegetables and immediately pushed the basket forward. "Miss Huang Yi, you don't have to be so polite. I should be the one to cook for you. Who would have thought that your culinary skills are better than mine? Also, you gave me enough money. These vegetables aren't worth much." Although Huang Yi was a bit moved, young princess consort's instructions were still in her ears. So she still shook her head and declined. "No, thank you, big brother." Huang Yi finished speaking and continued to cut the vegetables. Luckily, young princess consort told her to prepare some ingredients that were easy to carry around and wouldn't spoil easily. Otherwise, in this kind of environment, where would she find these ingredients to cook with? The scarred chef saw that the other person didn't appreciate his kindness and couldn't help but feel a bit unhappy. He originally wanted to use this matter to establish some friendships and pave the way for the following matters. However, these people were very vigilant. When dinner was ready, Huang Yi ordered the servants to bring it out. Chu Qingyan and the others were already sitting around the table. When the food was placed, everyone started to move their chopsticks. "Stinky brat, don't forget that you still owe me 5 plates of pastries." The Emperor Emeritus bit into a bun and reminded her word by word, as if he was afraid that she wouldn't acknowledge the debt. Chu Qingyan's hand that was holding the vegetables paused. She looked at the Emperor Emeritus, who was glaring at her, and felt a bit helpless. "Grandfather, after being together for so long, you still don't trust my character?" The Emperor Emeritus looked like he didn't care. "In any case, you can't go back on your words." She felt drunk too. At the dinner table, the two passed the time in jest. Xiao Su always ignored their bickering. After dinner, Huang Yi led the servant girls to clean up. Chu Qingyan wandered around the main hall to digest the food. "Ah, The bowl fell to the ground and shattered. Chu Qingyin looked over and saw Huang Yi and a servant girl squatting down to clean up the debris. When she walked over, she heard the servant girl say to Huang Yi, "Sister Huang Yi, what's wrong with you today? Why are you so absent-minded?" "I'm fine." Huang Yi looked up and saw the young princess consort standing to the side. She immediately stood up and bowed. "Huang Yi, come with me," Chu Qingyin said to Huang Yi as she let the servant maids clean up the debris on the ground. Thus, the two of them walked to a secluded corner. Chu Qingyin turned around and looked at her. "Why do you feel so uneasy today?" She had already noticed it during dinner today. She originally thought that it was normal for a girl to be a little emotional, but now it seemed that something was wrong. Huang Yi heard the young princess consort ask and no longer pondered on it. She spoke her doubts. When this servant was cooking in the kitchen these past 2 days, this servant felt that the smell in the kitchen was a little strange. At first, I didn't think much of it, but today, this smell is getting stronger. It seems that something is wrong. I searched for half a day, but I don't know where the smell is coming from. So this servant feels uneasy. Strange smell? Chu Qingyin furrowed her brows in confusion. "Take me to see." Huang Yi nodded. Chu Qingyin led Xining and followed Huang Yi into the kitchen. Before they entered the kitchen, a pungent smell hit them. Chu Qingyin frowned and used a brocade handkerchief to cover her nose and mouth. She stepped through the doorway. The dark kitchen, old wooden boards, and mottled traces everywhere. If it wasn't for the knives, pots, and pans placed inside, it was hard to imagine that this dirty and messy place was a kitchen. Chu Qingyin walked to the knife table. Some of the knives were rusted and were still placed on the table. The other knives were greasy and reflected the light of the lamps. On the chopping board, there were knife marks everywhere. There were also unknown things stuck on them. Flies were flying everywhere. It was nauseating. Huang Yi saw the young princess consort's brows furrowed and immediately explained, "Mistress, Huang Yi didn't use these things to cook. She used everything we brought from the Fu." Chu Qingyin nodded. She always trusted Huang Yi. Chu Qingyin's gaze was drawn to the large knives hanging on the wall. She asked in confusion, "What kind of food needs such large knives?" Huang Yi sized up the knives and shook her head. This servant also doesn't understand. This servant has been cooking for so many years, but this servant has never seen a dish that needs such knives. Chu Qingyin's gaze moved down. She saw that near the chopping board, there were some black and purple marks. She pointed and asked, "Do you know what this is?" Huang Yi moved closer to take a look. "Maybe it's the bloodstains left behind when the chicken or fish was killed." Chu Qingyin looked at the large knives and then looked at the bloodstains. She felt uneasy, but she didn't know where this uneasiness came from. At this time, the small door of the back kitchen was opened. The scarred chef walked out, wiping his hands on his apron. He hadn't thought that Chu Qingyin's group would be here. His expression was panicked at first, then he calmed down. He smiled and greeted, "Little Gongzigu, you didn't play in the hall, but came to this filthy place. Aren't you worried that you'll dirty your shoes?" "I'm not that precious," Chu Qingyin responded faintly. But when her gaze landed on the blood-stained apron, she couldn't help but ask, "Scarred master, this is?" The scarred chef rubbed his hands and said with a smile, "I just went to the small storeroom to kill a sheep. I didn't have time to wash it before you saw it." Chu Qingyin's black eyes turned, and then she walked in the direction he had come from. This young master has never seen the scene of a chicken or a sheep being killed. Let's go see." The moment Chu Qingyin finished speaking, the scarred chef saw that the situation wasn't good. He immediately took a step back and blocked the small door. He was tall and strong, so the small door was blocked by him. Chu Qingyin pretended to be impatient and said, "Scarred master, what are you doing? That place is too messy. It hasn't been cleaned up yet. If you see it, you won't be able to eat or sleep for 3 days and 3 nights. So it's better if you don't go." Although the scarred chef's words were persuasive, his tone was very firm. Chu Qingyin retracted her foot and said with a smile, "Scarred master is so considerate. Then this young master won't disturb you. You can go about your business. Huang Yi, Xining, let's go out." Nodding at the scarred chef, Chu Qingyin left with the 2 servant girls. Once out of the kitchen, Chu Qingyin quickly walked towards the stairs. She wanted to tell Big Ice Cube about what she had discovered just now. The scarred chef looked at Chu Qingyin's figure and swept a glance at the kitchen. His eyes were fierce. It looked like he had to get rid of these people tonight, to avoid any more trouble. So he turned and left the kitchen. He wanted to discuss with them and make a move in advance. Chapter 188. Chu Qingyin quickly went upstairs and then pushed open the door. Xiao Su raised his head when he heard the sound. Seeing her panting appearance, he raised his brows and asked, "What happened?" Chu Qingyin quickly walked in front of him and anxiously said, "Big Ice Cube, I found that this is very strange. When I went into the kitchen just now, I found that there was a rotten smell in that place. It was very pungent." Xiao Su put down the book in his hand and beckoned for her to sit down. "There's no rush. You can speak slowly." Chu Qingyin sat down on the chair in front of him. Their chopping board is very big, much bigger than the ones in our fu. The knives are twice the size of normal knives. Normal knives are rusty, and it's obvious that they haven't been used in a long time. But those large knives are very sharp. It's obvious that they are used often. But think about it. Who would use such large knives to cook? Xiao Su nodded, indicating for her to continue. Chu Qingyin thought back to the scene just now and picked out the main points. "I met that chef in the kitchen. His hands were covered in blood that he hadn't wiped clean, and his apron was also covered in blood. He said that he was going to slaughter sheep, but the rain has been so heavy these past 2 days. Where would they buy sheep? Also, Hualing brought people to check the inn before and didn't find any animals. So, what are you suspecting?" Xiao Su's tone was faint, so faint that no one noticed the persuasion in his words. Chu Qingyin hesitated and was a bit uncertain, but she raised her head and looked at the person in front of her. She slowly said, "I suspect that this is a blacken that kills people and steals their goods." Just as she finished speaking, she saw a hint of a smile appear in the Big Ice Cube's eyes. It was as if the light waves were shattered and rippled in his eyes. It was too beautiful to be absorbed. She was a bit stunned. This was the first time she saw the Big Ice Cube smile. Xiao Su stroked her head and said in a gratified tone, "Your analysis is good. You've improved." Although Chu Qingyin was happy to be praised by Big Ice Cube, it was not the right time to talk about it. Hearing Big Ice Cube's tone, Chu Qingyin suddenly had a thought. "Big Ice Cube, did you know it from the beginnings?" Xiao Su withdrew his hand and looked at her calmly. "Leave everything to Ben Wang. You don't have to worry." As soon as she finished speaking, she knew that Big Ice Cube had his own plans, so she nodded in relief. "Sigh, I feel like Big Ice Cube is making me feel more and more secure, isn't it?" Chu Qingyin leaned on the table and looked at him seriously. Although the Big Ice Cube was wearing a mask, she never got tired of looking at him. She didn't know what she was looking at. Xiao Su picked up the unfinished book and let the little fellow look at it. He was already used to the little fellow's inexplicable actions. By the time Chu Qingyin went upstairs, the scarred chef and the others had already begun to move. The fat man was holding the candle given to him by the black-clothed man. Inside was a high-level hallucinogenic incense that could knock people unconscious. He slowly walked towards the lobby. When Hualing saw him come out, he asked as usual, "Shopkeeper, what are you doing?" The fat man laughed. "The candles in the lobby aren't bright enough. I'm worried that if the rain gets heavier at night, it won't be enough to light the room, so I specially brought out the high candles I bought before." Hualing nodded. Shopkeeper is considerate. Ethereal, who had been sitting in the lobby the entire time, slowly walked over when he saw this. "I've never seen this high candles before. Let me see." "This is just a normal." Before the fat man could finish speaking, Ethereal had already taken it and was playing with it in his hand. Hualing smiled as he explained for Ethereal, "He's just interested in the powder, rouge, and candles. Let him see it, and he'll return it to you after he sees it." The fat man spat out a sentence in his heart when he heard this. So it was a sissy. Ethereal looked at the fat man and knew what he was thinking. He looked at Hualing and signaled for him to restrain himself. Hualing shook his head without caring, acting like he didn't see anything. Ethereal carelessly rubbed the high candles before throwing them back into the fat man's hands. He had a look of disgust. Really is normal. The fat man's face turned dark. Be careful. I'll cut you into 8 pieces later. Hualing saw Ethereal leave with his hands behind his back, and his eyes flashed. He turned to the fat man and said, "Then, shopkeeper, I'll leave it to you." The fat man felt that these words were simply amnesty. He immediately nodded and changed the candles in the lobby. When the candles were lit, the fat man's lips revealed a vicious smile. "In a bit, I'll have you all die without a grave." That black-clothed man had said that because these people were too vigilant, the candles would only take effect after an hour. Then they would wait a bit before coming back to collect the corpses. Gradually, the guards in the hall began to feel dizzy and faint. Then they slowly fell to the ground. After an hour, the people in the lobby were all lying on the ground. The shrewd woman's group of 3 followed the black-clothed man out. The black-clothed man in the lead looked around the lobby and nodded in satisfaction. The shrewd woman was a bit worried as she asked, "The people downstairs have all been taken care of. What about the people upstairs?" "This hallucination fragrance is everywhere. It's the same upstairs," the black-clothed man in the lead explained in disdain. The shrewd woman and the others were relieved. She rubbed her hands together and said in a nervous voice, "You promised us before that once everyone was taken care of, you would leave these corpses for us. Does that still count?" Have you ever heard of killing a donkey after it has outlived its usefulness?" The black-clothed man in the lead suddenly revealed a sinister smile. The shrewd woman's group of 3 suddenly opened their eyes wide and took a few steps back. The fat man angrily pointed at the black-clothed man and said, "You don't care about the righteousness of the underworld and go back on your words. If it wasn't for us, would you have taken care of these people so easily?" "Righteousness of the underworld? You've been in the underworld for so long. Don't you know what it means to be a villain? But I do have to thank you for your help. Don't worry, we'll let you die a quick death." The black-clothed man in the lead took a step back. The black-clothed men behind him immediately stepped forward, planning to surround the 3 people. The scarred chef saw that the situation was not good. He pulled out the big knife at his waist and said to his 2 companions, "Let's go. Want to leave? It's too late." As soon as the black-clothed man in the lead finished speaking, the 3 black-clothed men stabbed at them. The remaining black-clothed men quickly went to the stairs, planning to go upstairs and take down the people upstairs. The black-clothed man in the lead turned to go to the center of the lobby. But from the corner of his eyes, he saw the shrewd woman's group of 3 actually dodging his subordinates' swords. The 3 of them stood back to back and looked at him fiercely. Then they looked for an opening and planned to escape. "Don't let a single one of them go." The black-clothed man in the lead did not expect more trouble. His tone was gloomy. And at this time, the black-clothed man in the lead realized that none of the black-clothed men upstairs came down. He suddenly had a bad feeling. Turning his head, on the stairs, a black slender figure stood with his hands behind his back, as if he was looking down on everyone. "Since you're here, then don't leave." As soon as the voice fell, the guards who were still staggering stood up in unison. Chapter 189. Hualing waved his hand, and the guards immediately lit up their weapons, standing off against the black-clothed people in the lobby. How could it be like this? Did the candles not have any effect? The fat man had already forgotten his situation as he asked in disbelief. A clear voice sounded out. "If it had any effect, would the 3 of you still be standing there without being affected?" Chu Qingyin's hands were supporting her chin as she leaned against the railing. Her voice was innocent, but her lips were curled into a smile that wasn't a smile. The 3 people below and the black-clothed people all felt that the 2 people standing on the stairs were too dazzling. The wild winds outside did not stop as the dark clouds pressed down and torrential rain began to pour down. The entire world fell into darkness once again. Other than the flickering candlelight in the lobby, they could only vaguely see each other's faces. The atmosphere was cold, and the flames were about to erupt. Chu Qingyin was infected, and she couldn't help holding her breath. When the leader of the black-clothed men saw that his plan had failed, he didn't want to delay any longer. He waved his hand at the black-clothed men behind him. Immediately, dozens of black-clothed men took out their bows and arrows. The tips of the arrows were aimed in two directions, upstairs and downstairs. Chu Qingyan looked at the arrows that were glowing with a green light and narrowed her eyes. These arrows were poisonous. Xiao Su did not ask who these black-clothed people were or why they were here, as he directly gave the order, "Kill." These people were all death warriors. There was no need to say anything else. "Shoot!" The black-clothed leader waved his hand, and several dozen arrows flew towards the lobby and upstairs. Hualing and Ethereal dodged the arrows and flipped behind the black-clothed people. With a wave of their swords, they cut down many arrows. Without the arrows, Hualing's group lost most of their control, and the two sides fell into a chaotic battle. 3 or 4 arrows flew towards Chu Qingyan, and she moved back in fear. Suddenly, a figure flashed in front of her, and with a wave of his sleeve, the arrows changed directions and stabbed into the wall. Xiao Su turned to look at the frightened little fellow and said with a frown, "Didn't you learn Qinggong?" Chu Qingyan wanted to cry, but had no tears. The danger came too suddenly. She had already forgotten that she knew Qinggong. Xiao Su's gaze turned towards the hall and met with the leader of the men in black. He reached out and pulled her back. "Stay in the room. Qing, he will protect you." Chu Qingyan nodded. The situation was chaotic, and she couldn't do anything to help. She didn't want to be a burden to everyone, so she turned around and entered the room. Hearing the sound of the door closing behind him, Xiao Su flew down. The leader of the black-clothed men drew his sword and charged towards him. Xiao Su dodged the fierce attack and casually sucked towards the ground. A long sword flew up from the ground, and he caught it and began to fight with it. At this moment, Chu Qingyan was sitting in her room uneasily. She didn't know how the battle was going down there. What she was most worried about was whether the big ice cube would be injured. Qingyi had already received the order and was guarding the room. She saw the little Wang Fei's uneasy expression and said unconcernedly, "Little Gongzi, it seems like you haven't seen any great storms before. This kind of scene is a common occurrence for our master." Common occurrence? How common did it have to be for it to be described with these words? Why are there so many people who want to kill your master? She couldn't help asking. Qingyi didn't want to answer at first, but thinking of how Hualing had mentioned to her that this little Wang Fei was not light in her master's heart, she forced herself to answer. There are many people who want master to disappear from the world and not be able to participate in the battle for the position of crown prince. There are people who want to create a strong enemy in the border. When she said this, Qingyi suddenly stopped. Her expression was serious as she raised her hand to have Chu Qingyan not speak. She turned around and pointed her sword at the closed door, holding her breath. Just as Qingyi was preparing herself for battle, the door was suddenly kicked open. 3 injured men who were leaning against each other saw Chu Qingyan in the room. They smiled sinisterly and said, "I knew she was hiding here." Chu Qingyan saw the shrewd woman, the fat man, and the scarred chef. She gave a cold laugh. "So it's you guys. Little Gongzi, I wanted to properly love you, but it seems like I can't." The shrewd woman stepped in, but Qingyi blocked in front of Chu Qingyan first. She pointed her sword at them. "What do you want to do?" "What do we want to do? Does it even need to be said? Of course we want to capture your little Gongzi," the scarred chef said viciously. Now that the lobby had become a battlefield, they couldn't leave. If they stayed any longer, they would only be caught in the crossfire. The only way they could think of was to hold Chu Qingyan hostage and jump down from the window. They could have just snuck out from the second floor, but they felt that Chu Qingyan and her group were not just any rich young masters. They might even hunt them down. Thus, they needed to have a bargaining chip in their hands. Chu Qingyan, who looked so weak, became their bargaining chip. Seeing how respectful those people were to her, they guessed that her status was not low at all. Therefore, they risked their lives to kidnap her. It was only then that Chu Qingyan realized what they were planning. She was filled with disdain as she said, "I advise you to surrender now. Surrender without a fight." Do you think that with the human lives that we have stained our hands with, we will have a way out? Little Gongzi, don't be too naive. The shrewd woman sneered. Chu Qingyin's face darkened. That means the blood in your kitchen is not from animals. Of course not. Since we opened the shop, we have never spent a single cent to buy meat. The fat man laughed loudly. Could it be? Chu Qingyin felt her stomach churn. That's right. In that little storeroom, there are still a few bodies that have not been processed. If it wasn't for you guys, they would have been dried into meat jerky by now. The scarred man chuckled. His laughter was indescribably horrifying. Chu Qingyin looked at them in disbelief. Although she had heard of a black shop, she had never seen a black shop that killed people and ate human flesh. At this moment, her 3 views were turned upside down, and she couldn't help but want to vomit. What a pity! If it wasn't for these things, you guys would have already become dead souls under our knives. The fat man said regretfully. The shrewd woman wanted to interrupt and say something, but she suddenly felt that something was wrong. She immediately growled. You 2 idiots. Can't you see that she is stalling for time? Quickly go, grab her, and quickly leave. Chu Qingyin didn't expect the 3 of them to wake up so quickly. She shrugged her shoulders. Seeing them approach, she took out the dagger that her father had made for her from her sleeve. She unsheathed it and placed it in front of her chest. Qingyi saw that she was so calm, and her heart relaxed. She pointed her sword at the 3 of them. Don't come any closer, otherwise I won't be polite. Not polite? You are not even enough to fill the gaps between our teeth. The fat man took out the axe from his waist and stepped forward to chop Qingyi's head. Qingyi quickly raised her sword to block, but unexpectedly, her sword was split in 2. Qingyi couldn't help but retreat a few steps. Just as she steadied herself, she felt a pain in her chest and spat out a mouthful of blood. She was shocked. What a strong internal force. Chu Qingyin narrowed her eyes. She had heard Big Ice Cube say that Qingyi's martial arts were not inferior to the Xiao Line Knight Ming Wei that he trained. That was why he was assured that she would be protected by Qingyi. Now it seemed that these 3 people were hidden experts. Who are you guys? Chu Qingyin looked at them coldly. Chapter 190. The shrewd woman approached step by step, her face bewitching as if she was trying to trick a child. Little young master, have you heard of the 3 killers of Jianghu? The 3 fools of Jianghu? Chu Qingyin felt that these 3 people's appearances were quite fitting for this title. However, Qingyi was shocked. Could it be that you guys are the 3 killers of heaven, earth, and man that everyone in Jianghu wanted to punish 7 years ago? Oh, this little girl is quite knowledgeable. What a pity, you're about to go to hell. The shrewd woman held the short spear with both hands, not allowing for any explanation as she swung it towards Qingyi. Qingyi was still holding the broken sword in her hand. She raised her hand to block the spear, but the shrewd woman raised her leg and kicked towards her stomach. Qingyi was caught off guard and flew into the wall. Qingyi struggled to get up, but she spat out a mouthful of blood. Little young master, run quickly. Master is below. Cough, cough. Qingyi. Chu Qingyin was about to go forward, but her hand was grabbed by the fat man who had approached at some point. She stabbed the dagger in her hand towards him. The fat man snorted coldly and reached out to chop her wrist. That dagger fell to the ground as she couldn't hold it. Her hands were tied behind her back, and she was quickly restrained. Chu Qingyin cursed inwardly. Just as she was about to shout, a piece of cloth was stuffed into her mouth. Seeing that Chu Qingyin was restrained, the shrewd woman immediately looked around vigilantly. She heard that the fighting downstairs was still intense, so she said, "Take this opportunity to leave quickly." Yes. The fat man and the scarred chef immediately followed the shrewd woman and flew down from the window. Ignoring the pouring rain, the 3 of them carried Chu Qingyin and used their qinggong, quickly shuttling through the forest. Chu Qingyin narrowed her eyes. The wind and rain were too heavy, and she could no longer see the road in front of her. She only felt that these 3 people's qinggong was outstanding, not inferior to hers at all. Back then, her qinggong was recognized by Turin. It seemed that outside the capital, there were many crouching tigers and hidden dragons. Where do we go? The scarred chef shook the rainwater off his face and asked loudly. To the ferry. The shrewd woman blurted out. Are you crazy? Now that the water level is so high and the storm is so strong, do you want to be buried in the water and let those fish collect your corpse? The scarred chef's face was full of disapproval. The shrewd woman roared back. If you go back, you'll be caught up very soon. Even if the servants don't chase after you, there are still those men in black. Now you can only take the risk. Don't forget, I'm the best person to cross the river. The two of them were silent. The shrewd woman's words were not without reason. Thus, the three parties reached an agreement and quickly headed towards the ferry. Chu Qingyin's hands were tied tightly, and she couldn't break free at all. She wasn't worried at all, because the big ice cube would definitely come to save her. But looking at the situation now, they were planning to cross the river in the rain. If the big ice cube chased after them, crossing the river in this kind of weather was very dangerous. The rain was getting heavier and heavier. The visibility in front of her was too low. All she could see was a curtain of rain. Chu Qingyin suddenly felt at a loss. No, she could not rely on others for everything. She had to think of a way to save herself. In the inn, Hualing was dealing with two men in black. He didn't know where these men in black came from, but there were so many of them. Moreover, their martial arts weren't bad. They could be considered intermediate-level death warriors. Although they had more people in the beginning, with the addition of Turin and the others, the situation became one-sided. Most of the men in black had already been dealt with. The leader of the men in black was currently fighting with Xiao Su. Xiao Su suddenly looked up at the stairs with an uneasy mind. There was no movement upstairs at all, so he didn't know how the little fellow was doing. When the black-clothed man saw that Xiao Su was distracted, the silver chain hidden in his sleeve flew out and headed straight for Xiao Su's shoulder. The end of the chain had a sharp barb that could pierce through wood. If it had been a human body, it would have pierced through it. Xiao Su came back to his senses. His sword drew a circle in the air, and the chain tightly wrapped around his sword. Seeing this, the black-clothed man fiercely pulled, and Xiao Su took advantage of the opportunity to lean forward. The two of them were less than 3 steps away from each other. They waved their hands and struck each other. Both of their martial arts were strong and powerful. Immediately, the entire inn shook, and the airflow sent many people around them flying. Xiao Su floated down from midair, while the black-clothed man retreated a few steps until one of his feet touched a pillar. Only then did he stop. However, the black cloth covering his face was already soaked with blood, showing that his injury was not light. His Royal Highness martial arts have reached perfection. This old man admires you. We'll fight another day. The leader of the men in black left these words and then turned to jump out the window. The remaining men in black also followed him. Hualing immediately brought people to chase after them. Xiao Su, who was standing in the middle of the hall, slowly revealed a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. He pursed his lips and raised his finger to wipe it as if nothing had happened. Master is missing. Shi Ning, who had already separated from her master downstairs, opened the room at this time and found that her master was gone. She immediately cried out. When Xiao Su heard this, he stepped on the wooden stairs and flew up to the second floor. Turin, who was counting the men in black, looked over when he heard this. He saw that his master was already impatiently using his martial arts to rush upstairs. This was the first time he saw his master so impatient. He immediately put down what he was doing and rushed up to the second floor. When Xiao Su entered the room, he only saw the unconscious Qing Yi, the dagger lying on the ground, and the wide, open window. Cold wind and heavy rain poured in, chilling the people who entered the room. Qing Yi, wake up. Ethereal went forward and gave her a medicine before trying to wake her up. After a while, Qing Yi slowly woke up. When she saw who was standing in front of her, she immediately coughed lightly and said with difficulty, Master, the little Gongzi was taken away by the 3 demons of heaven, earth, and man. Quickly go and save him. At this time, A guard ran up and reported, "Master, when we checked the footprints just now, we found that the people who kidnapped the little Gongzi were heading towards the ferry." "All right, let's go." Xiao Su turned around to go downstairs. Turin immediately stopped him. "Master, this subordinate has failed in his duty this time. I actually allowed these assassins to sneak into the inn. This subordinate will atone for his mistake and save the little Gongzi." Xiao Su stopped and looked at him. These assassins learn a type of martial arts called ninjutsu. Their ability to hide is comparable to yours. You can't blame yourself for not discovering them in time. You can only say that your skills are not as good as theirs. Yes, this subordinate will strengthen the training from now on. Turin lowered his head in shame. It's just that the storm is so heavy now. This subordinate is worried about you. Leave the little Gongzi's matter to this subordinate. You can wait for this subordinate's news at the inn. Turin felt that his lord was precious and that there was really no need for him to take such a risk. When Xiao Su heard this, he took a deep look at the boundless horizon. His tone was somewhat ethereal. "There's no need to say any more. This prince will go and save him personally." His subordinate was capable, and he trusted him. But this little guy was his person. He had to protect his own people. When Turin saw that his master had made up his mind, he sighed and could only order people to prepare horses and straw raincoats. Lightning flashed, thunder rumbled, and the rain was heavy. A black horse took the lead, followed by a group of guards. It was like a sharp arrow moving quickly on the ground. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.